Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Let's Talk with IMAH. Tonight we're going to be discussing and talking and podcasting on Muslim revivers, in particularly the great Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, Qaddasallahu sirrahu al-aziz. I'm joined by just Imam Adil tonight. Unfortunately, Soulja is not here yet, but he may join us a bit later. But for now, welcome Imam Adil tonight. You have been a huge hit with the following. You've been a huge hit with the listeners and viewers. They wanted more of you. They wanted to see your soft side. So we've got you here now, live and exclusive on Let's Talk with IMAH podcast. Guys, go and subscribe. Subscribe to this channel. And most importantly, subscribe to the Let's Talk with IMAH podcast channel. All you have to do is type Let's Talk with IMAH. A few of the videos will come up. Click on the channel link, subscribe, and then click the bell button. And you will be notified every time we go live to do a podcast or any podcast is uploaded. So, Imam Adil, how are you tonight? Let me guess, you've been teaching a class as always, and you're really tired. It's really cold and you're hungry as well. Best get Jabba to get some food in, or have I just taken the words out of your mouth?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First and foremost, to Imam Sab and to all the viewers, listeners, wherever you may be, to each and every one of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's a privilege, an honor to be on the podcast for the second time. Yes, it goes without saying. I think I was a bit of a hit in episode 3.
Oh, do
even
you?
though you won't accept it.
No, we do.
Imam Sab's claiming that it was just my fans who appreciated my appearance. Should
Guys,
I say.
start commenting in the live chat if you feel Imam Adil was an instant hit on this podcast and you love this side of him. So thumbs up.
MashaAllah, it's a good way of engaging. We had a parent who come in earlier of one of our students, Samad Hussain and Ibrahim Hussein's father, who came in. He says, Imam Sahib, it's good to see a different way of engaging with the youngsters, aside from the usual lecturing and preaching technique that we adopt. So it's a good initiative. I think it's gone down quite well. Today's episode 5. You did a bit of a different one on Thursday evening, I think it was.
For Diego Armando Maradona.
That's the one. I think just over 2 hours, a discussion regarding
Just football.
Diego and one of the greats of football, and who is the greatest footballer. I'm not sure what the conclusion was to that.
I think most of us would agree that maybe you can shed light, Imam Adil, you're into your football as well. Maybe, I think we concluded on Diego Maradona.
Okay.
On the basis that he was just a single footballer on his own, had such an impact on a club like Sheffield United. It wasn't Sheffield United, it was Napoli, the equivalent. Relegation, battling Italian team in the best league at that time in the world. For him to take Napoli to the summit of Italian football, the summit of European football, the peak at the excellence of European football, and, to take Argentina to the World Cup. My mother's reaction says it all, but I think we came to a conclusion that Diego was the best.
Chalo, we're not really worried about...
What's your view, Imam Adil? Tell us.
We're not worried or bothered about who's the greatest footballer. Alhamdulillah, today we're going to be
But go on, just tell us. I know. Just tell us, who do you think, from your view?
The greatest of the Awliya Kamilin.
Huh? I'll just give you a minute. Just tell us, who do you think is the greatest footballer ever?
It depends on what era it is, isn't it? So, I'm a big fan of Zidane. Obviously, we grew up watching him, 98 World Cup, 2000 Euros. That great goal in the final against Leverkusen, I think 2001.
League,
so we grew
up. But is he the greatest? Is he up there with
in the 90s and the early 2000s certainly, and then obviously now we've seen the Messi and Ronaldo era. I'm a big fan of Ronaldo, but not dismissing the natural talent that Messi has. But again, I said it in the last podcast that when we were talking about Muslim revolutionaries, we've not seen them revolutionaries, but we've heard of them. Similarly with footballers, we've not seen them play. We've heard of them, or we've watched their clips on YouTube. I don't think you can base your judgment just on that. Stats are stats. You know, a lot of people argue.
But if you went statistically, Dani Alves has won the most trophies by any footballer. So does that make him the greatest?
Yeah, but I was just going to say, you took the opportunity for me to mention that with Pele's statistic, a lot of people are saying they're not really 100% accurate.
Yeah, a lot of his garden goals were included.
So you can't really base the judgment on statistics. But you know, it's every person's opinion is different. But like I was saying, there is no doubt amongst the Awliya, the greatest is the Muslim reviver who we're dedicating tonight's podcast to, Sayyidina Shaykh Sayyid Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So, you know, I think we should focus on that.
Yeah, no, you're obviously taking the conversation that way. But now that you have took the conversation there, you might as well host and ask me, and I'll answer. What do you think about that? Shall we swap seats?
No. Let's stick to Let's Talk with IMAH.
Right, okay.
We
can do Let's Talk with IMAS.
No, I don't know.
Imam Muhammad Adil Shehzad.
I don't know. I don't know if people want to talk with me. I think, like you mentioned towards the end of last podcast, we have our principles. We stick by them. Coincidentally, I bumped into somebody. I mentioned it to you earlier. I bumped into somebody yesterday in Asda's, and he goes, Imam Sahib, love the podcast. Love the fact that you weren't willing to mention the names of certain deviants, and you stuck to your principles and your guns. So yeah, you know, whether you accept it or not, we've got some really good
Imam
feedback.
Adil, you know, we all hold those views. Whatever, I share the absolute same sentiments, but it's a name. I mean, if we can mention Diego Maradona's name, who's not a Muslim at all, you know, we can. Do you know what I'm saying? We live in the 21st century. You know,
I don't really know what you're saying.
You do. You know exactly what I'm saying. But nevertheless, we leave that for another discussion, another topic on another day.
Inshallah.
You know, I do play, you know, the
dual role.
And it's good. I believe in order to get answers, and tonight you're going to really be tested, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to be playing the other side and fighting questions from different sides and angles, because you're right. I think podcast, this is probably the new way forward to educate people. You know, there's the preaching, teaching methodology, and then there's the podcasting, teaching methodology. And, you know, methodologies evolve over time. I can only talk about myself. You've obviously seen this as well. 10 years ago, packing mosques out was the big thing. It was the hype, the social illnesses, these topics that I spoke on, for example. Then over time, we've seen that the Mawlid, that grew. So the masjids were packed at the time of Mawlids. And now with the COVID, everything seems to have gone online. And podcasting, you know, we get in on average 200 people across the 5 episodes. We've had on average 200 odd people tune in and watch, you know, the podcasts. You know, we've had nearly 15,000 views. And that's just in the last 5 episodes. So I agree with you. I think podcasting is a way, and there's been a lot of people who have supported and you know, shared the sentiments. I've been out driving about and stuff, and you know, as I've been out driving about and stuff, you know, people have stopped us once we were driving, and somebody stopped in the middle of the road and says, you know what, I enjoy watching your podcast. And he goes, look, I've never been into this stuff. People, it's a different style and method of getting the word across. And you know, I think it's something really important. I think it's something really, really innovative. And it's the new way forward. And I just think that things are going to be, you know, it's miraculous. As miraculous as Mr. Soulja was turning up and sitting next to you. Where has he popped out from? Ladies and gentlemen, look who's here.
Sorry, I'm late.
Wow, how did you just land
better late than never, I say.
It's one of them ones. You see me here, you see
Bari
me not.
khushbu idea, mashallah.
Bas Janab,
Looking
alhamdulillah.
the part today as well.
I was feeling the Sufi vibe, obviously, my first topic on the podcast. That's obviously got an Islamic nature to it as well.
Yeah,
But-
guys are saying, "Oh, what does Was know about this?" And but you're gonna see a different side. He's gonna actually. I want Was to throw questions at Imam Adil about the modern day. No, because obviously I'm not in your seat. If I was sat in your seat, I'd love it. But
So you did offer me to sit in your seat, so I have no one to
Angle
really
numbers,
blame but
lads,
myself,
you
no, but just experiences that you've seen and stuff. When we get to that point of the conversation, you'll see Was will ask questions like the darbars. A lot of these Sufistic traditions and what is this and saying that let's begin. Obviously, this is the Muslim revivers. You can say an offshoot of Let's Talk with IMAH, Muslim revivers series. And who better to start with than the great Qutb, Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir al-Ghailani, pronounced Ghailani and Jilani as well. And saying that, Imam Adil, before we get to the great sage, the great saint of Allah, the great man of Allah, this saintly figure who is so, glorified and so mesmerizing when we read his stories and we study his life, he embodies a specific tradition within Islam. And this is just an introduction for us to lay into. The introduction towards the spiritual aspect of Islam. So spiritualism, spirituality, shed some light on that, Imam Adil, with regards to the spirituality aspect. Of course, we've read it in the Quran, Tazkiyah has been mentioned. We've read in Hadith, like you mentioned before, ihsan. These terms have been used. The word Sufi was never used. Tassawuff was never used. Where's this term come about from? And what is it? What just in a nutshell, tell us without going into a speech and tangent. Tell us where we're gonna. What is it? If somebody, a young lad watching right now, who is interested in knowing who this man is, and what he stood for, and what his accomplishments and achievements were, what does he stand for? What is tasawwuf? What is spirituality?
I think you mentioned some aspects of that within your question, which is an advantage of having that knowledge when posing these questions. The term tazkiyah is used in the Quran. Allah Almighty says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. That successful is he who purifies himself, and purification is attained by the dhikr of Allah Almighty, وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ, and فَصَلَّى by way of prayer. So ultimately being an adherent of the Sharia leads to spirituality. So the term in the Quran is tazkiyah, and as you mentioned, what was it in the Hadith Sharif?
Ihsan.
Ihsan, yes. When Jibreel alayhi salam came and asked the three questions, or balki it was 5 in total, the famous narration referred to as Hadith Jibreel, and one of them questions was what? Akhbirni anil ihsan. That, O Prophet of Allah, inform me what is ihsan. And the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying that you worship Allah Almighty as though you see Him, and if you can't see Him, then know that He sees you. Now, with these terms that were used in Quran and Sunnah, you're right, the term Tassawuff or Sufism and spirituality weren't used. But like the case with a lot of the sciences that evolved after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we have this evolution in this science and field of spirituality and tasawwuf as well.
Okay.
Some Sahaba who embodied the actual concept of tasawwuf, but there was no name for it. Like Data Sahab mentioned in the Kashf al-Mahjub, that in the time of the Sahaba, there was hal, but there wasn't qal. Meaning that there was a state there, but there wasn't really a term for it. Whereas today we have qal, but we don't have hal. Mazid di gall hai na. Today we have qal, but we don't have hal. Meaning we have a name for it. It's spirituality, it's tassawuff, it's tazkiyah, it's ihsan. But we don't have people who embody that state.
That's fine. When we go to ihsan, you said ihsan now, that اعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. Worship Allah as if you can see Him. If you cannot, then know that Allah Almighty sees you. فإنه يراك. So we're saying effectively that ihsan is God consciousness. To be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times. In worship and outside. That's effectively and simple. That's what it is.
In private, in public, in the presence of people, behind closed doors, at all times, as you mentioned, to be aware of Allah Almighty.
And to be conscious that Allah is watching me. Allah sees me. He knows what I do. He knows every move that I make. And having that is, in essence, probably one of the highest levels of a spiritual state.
Yes.
Like you said, hal means state. So there's states within people. So for example, if I brought you into the conversation, what is your spiritual state? How would you then term that? How would you then?
Everybody's on edge. Everyone is on edge to find out what the answer is here.
You know, we can say a physical state. A person can say, I'm physically feeling really good. I'm weighing 12.5 stones. I'm benching 80 kgs. I'm weighing 15.5 like Imam Adil. I'm eating loads. Probably equivalent next to him is...
I'll stick to the 12.5 stone that you mentioned. I'm not going to argue.
I was actually worried about the state of the sofa today. Do palwan ek jagah baithe ho san. Oh, we chaudhry alhamdulillah.
Na suba bada tajrbe Allah hai.
Oh, end par koi pata nahi kya halat ho.
Bade bade
End par pata nahi koi.
But so we know physical state. We know mental state. We know financial state. You know, I'm mentally all over the place, but I'm rich. Like a lot of celebrities would say. Mentally they're not there, but they've got loads of money. Then you've got guys who's financially not there, but mentally they're going strong. It's going good. Then you've got guys who are mentally there, financially there, but physically they can't move. They're ill. What good is that money? What good is the mental state when physically you can't do nothing? And then you've got people whose spiritual state. Now, tell us, if somebody asked you, for example, whilst I'm putting you on the spot here, putting the light onto you as well, that if somebody asked you, don't tell us your financial state, don't tell us your physical state, don't tell us but tell us what's your spiritual state. How would you explain that?
I think now at this moment in my life, I'm probably the best time for me to answer this question. Because if you asked me this question maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, it would have been very, very different. But the point that I'm at now, I can now tell the difference between having some sort of spiritual foundation where you can acknowledge that there is some sort of spirituality there, and the difference between having it and not having it. Now, you mentioned all these different states that people have. There's the mental state they're in, the financial state they're in, the spiritual. I believe that the spiritual state is the core one. If you asked me directly, where do I think my spiritual state is at right now, in terms of iman, in terms of belief in God, you know, we can't see God. So when you explain to a child that something exists but you will never be able to see it, they might not be able to kind of comprehend that, you know, those factors that something like this exists. But when you grow up and you're taught this in our households, you know, we're taught that there's a God that you will never see. It's still, you know, it's a very taboo thing. A lot of people won't be open about it, but people do question, is it really true? And they come to this point in their life where you don't believe it till you need God. And when you reach that spiritual state where you believe that there is a being that I can't see, but I'm reliant upon, that's when you can feel that you build on that spiritual state. You know, I'll be very, very open. In terms of spirituality, alhamdulillah, you know, I've read Naats my whole life. My, you know, family, everyone, I've sat with you guys. But, you know, on an individual basis, not everybody is that spiritual. Not everybody, you know, it's when you're by yourself that you know what your spiritual state is. You can't be everybody can sit in the lads and, you know, and talk about God and talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you're by yourself and you really think about Allah, that's where you know where your iman is and where your spiritual state really is.
And where you stand.
And where you stand, exactly.
So you're saying your spiritual state right now is so much better?
So much better.
Because 3-4 weeks ago, you had an experience, you went through a problem, a situation where you had to find
Yeah.
your connection with Allah Jalla wa Ala.
Yeah.
When you found this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's continued, and now you're feeling so much better
Of course. Yeah.
and spiritually connected.
Yeah.
But it's a state. States don't last long.
No, but what it's done
You're
is
always in and out of them.
It set me a reserve, because what I went through, what was going through my head, the only thing that could fix that for me was my spiritual state. It wasn't good enough. I had to increase my iman, I had to make it stronger. But what that's done now is, yes, alhamdulillah, whatever I went through, it's all sorted. But I might move away from that. I might move away from reading my namaz. I might move away from all these things. But I know, whereas I didn't before, that if I ever reach that low again, then that's the point that I need to reach back to. So it's about having that knowledge. It's knowing that reserve is there. Yes, you might, stray away from it. Your spirituality might take a hit. Your belief in God you might start lacking in some places. You might start questioning certain things. But when you reach ultimate peace through that thing, you know that no matter how much you move away from that, to come back to peace, you need to strengthen that again. So what it's done for me in this, last few weeks, is it set me a reserve. Alhamdulillah, I'm on it. If I ever move away from it...
No, I think reserve is the wrong word. What you're trying to say is probably set you a benchmark.
A benchmark, yes.
Your benchmark has been set where you think, okay, you know what? I'm in a good place now.
Yeah.
If it drops, I know what I need to do to get back to that good place. So that's understandable. But then, obviously, bringing Imam Adil back into the conversation, we know you said that it's having that spiritual state, being in the state of spirituality. Just I wanted to elaborate a bit more. So you mentioned a few names of Sahaba like Sayyidina Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, radiyallahu an.
I was going to mention the
Right,
names,
okay.
but now you're going to mention them. Yeah.
But these are pioneering or standout companions who excelled in this field and science.
And essentially true embodiments of spirituality, which is what we're talking about today.
So, but all the Sahaba were spiritual.
Yep.
You know, we can't knock the spirituality of any companion. They were in the presence of the greatest guide, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. There's no greater guide than Nabi alayhi salatu was salam in the creation of Allah Jalla wa ala. And to be in his presence, they were taught by the best, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. But then, somebody might say, but it never, they've evolved this and gave it terms and they've changed the names. How's that? Give us another example. Like a name comes to mind, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Masud was excelled in the science of jurisprudence, mu'amalat and ibadat. And Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas was excelled in tafsir, commentary of the Quran. How did that then take evolution to then develop into sciences?
Those ulama who came after them, be that in the time of the tabi'un or itba'i tabi'in, they were then given the task of formalizing and systemizing these great sciences, which may not have had their terms in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but certainly they gained some sort of identity after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the sciences such as sarf and nahv and balagha and all these falsafa, for example, then we have mantiq, and similarly sciences in relation to ilmul kalam, aqidah. These sciences developed after the time and the period of the Sahaba Ikram. Remember, their primary aim was to spread Islam. The great battles that they took place or took part in, should I say, in the 10 years of the life of the Prophet ﷺ in Al-Madinatul Munawwara. And then after Nabi Sallallahu Islam's Dore Zamana, Dore Khilafat of Sayyidina Abu Bakr
30 years of...
You alluded to it in the last podcast. The great triumphs of Sayyidina Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, how they reached as far as modern day Azerbaijan. So their priorities were different to how the priorities of the generation that came after them were. But like we mentioned, like Sayyidina Abu Dharr al-Ghifari and Hazrat Shuaib Rumi and Hazrat Abu Huraira radiyallahu ta'ala anhum and many other Jalil Qadr Sahaba Ikram, all of them in reality, all of them practiced and embodied and epitomized what we would today refer to as a Sufi, because they actually lived and breathed Tassawuff from the Prophet ﷺ. Like you alluded to, the Nabi ﷺ was the ultimate murshid and the ultimate guide, and Nabi ﷺ gave them the blueprint of how to live their lives, not just two-dimensional like we now who we have people, and we're going to come to this later, deniers of Tassawuff, who say bas ji namaz paro, Allah Allah karo, that's it, and make our religion black and white, two-dimensional. When in reality, in light of the hadith sharif we alluded to earlier, it's not two-dimensional, but it's three-dimensional. Iman, Islam and ihsan, which is the term that is used. And sometimes what we find is that in the discussions of how the Sahaba Karam were in their lives' time, it becomes difficult to actually accept that or get our minds around that, because we're using what's around us today as a means of comparison, and that really can't do justice to it. That's what the issue is in regards to this.
So we see that the first, let's say, the Prophet ﷺ's life, 10 Hijri, and then from there onwards, the 30 years of the Khilafat, up to, let's say, the first 50 years after the Prophet ﷺ left this world, it was, a lot of the time was spent in establishing and strengthening the foundations of Islam and entering into new territories, and it was these campaigns that took place. Yarmouk, Yamama, the first navy of the Muslim that went across the sea towards Istanbul, Constantinia, and so on and so forth. So that was what it was, that's what was effectively the companions and those after them spend their time upon. And then after that, we see the emergence of big imams like al-Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa, Imam Dar al-Hijra Malik ibn Anas, Sayyiduna Imam Nasir al-Hadith Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, and the Imam of the Ahlul Sunnah Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and all those in between, Sufyan al-Thawri, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Imam al-A'mash, Sulaiman al-A'mash, Imam Lays al-Samarkandi,
Sa'id ibn Musayyab,
Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab,
and
Hasan al-Basri,
yes,
all these great men, scholars, the direct students of companions. These guys were, these men were the ones who then established and focused their attention not on the battlefield, not on conquering, not on taking over land. Rather, Islam has been established in Iraq. Now we see the emergence of...
That actually brings me to the point where, and you've alluded to this many a times, I remember one of the speeches you delivered, I was there by chance, many years ago, to the police force in Bedfordshire, that you delivered the bayan on jihad, and the word jihad comes from the word juhud, which means to struggle and strive, and we know that jihad is of how many types? Two types.
I wasn't at that speech.
You might not
I wasn't at that speech.
There are two types. So we have al-jihadul akbar and al-jihadul asghar. So even within the ta'limat of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this concept and tarbiyat of tasawwuf and spirituality was being done when the Sahaba returned from the military expedition, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that you've returned from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad. And the Sahaba were mind baffled by this, and Ya Rasulullah, how can it be the case that you're saying that we've returned from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad? And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to them that al-mujahidu man jahada nafsahu fi ta'atillah, that a true warrior is the one who struggles and strives against his own nafs and makes it subservient to the will of Allah Almighty,
obedience,
and in the obedience of Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala. So this concept we see within the ta'limat of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it's not just the terms that we mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, tazkiyah or ihsan, but we see within the ta'limat, because you were touching upon military expeditions. So within the teachings of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we see this being done.
So they nurture the companions, and not only just nurture the companions, but they theoretically and practically shown the companions that this tradition evolved then. We're saying that the tradition of spirituality which wasn't termed as Tassawuff, means spirituality. Simple. In simple, the word Tassawuff means spirituality. But this word didn't exist then, but the concept of this, the foundations of this are found within the Quran and Sunnah. You know,
Like
لَقَدْ
with the
مَنَّ
case,
اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ بَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِم. So tazkiyah, you will purify, he will purify them.
yes,
So the Prophet ﷺ, one of his jobs,
mission.
one of the jobs that Allah Almighty gave him was, the mission that He gave him was, not only are you going to teach him the book that I'm going to reveal upon you and the wisdom which you so well have been given by Allah Jalla wa Ala, by myself. Allah Almighty is telling Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam that you're going to purify them. You're going to purify their hearts, their eyes. You're going to cleanse them. It's cleansing, spiritual cleansing. So we understand that, and then, like you said, Jihadul Akbar, Jihadul Asghar, and it continues, and we see the likes of these great Imams. So who came? So Imam Abu Hanifa, Shafi, Malik, Ahmad bin Hanbal, we know that these are the four great Imams of jurisprudence, the schools of thought.
But that does not negate the fact that there were also Imams of Tassawwuf. There were also Imams of Aqidah and Aqa'id. There were also Imams of Sarf and Nahab and Ahadith. You know, that's often an objection laid against Imam Abu Hanifa, that he didn't do much work in the field of Hadith Sharif. But he did. He had his own collection of Ahadith Mubarakah, the Musnad of Imam Abu Hanifa, which very few people know about. So it's wrong to say that if somebody excelled in the field of fiqh, that they can't then also excel in the field of tasawwuf,
spirituality,
or in the field of aqaid, or any other aspect or dimension of the deen like
and
this.
I think that's a very good point, because when you study the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, though today it's not about Imam Abu Hanifa, and we'll dedicate a podcast to the great Imam in this Muslim Reviver series. You know, when you look at Imam Abu Hanifa and his spirituality, an example of his spirituality was, and this is a known fact about, and from very reliable sources, that for 40 years, Imam Abu Hanifa had the same wudu from Isha till Fajr. From Isha namaz till Fajr, for 40 years he had the same wudu. Meaning, he did not sleep at night. If you go to sleep for a moment, your wudu breaks.
Yes.
And he didn't sleep at night for 40 years. So what did he do at night for 40 years? People were at home sleeping. He taught during the day. Right? And then, what did he do then? So he spent the nights in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This tells you his spiritual state, the level of his spirituality. So if somebody asked you, what's your level of spirituality? And you say, I read my tahajjud. I'm sahibu qiyam al-layl. I read tahajjud salah. That's a very high spiritual state. That person must be very spiritual. If you can wake up at night when the rest of us are asleep, and you can connect with Allah.
That's one part which I think, because of the day and age that we live in, and this is not knocking Imam Sahib on his point, and we're in the social media era, we have to reveal what we do in order to show our spirituality.
Of course, yeah.
Whereas the men of the early period, early Islam, where we've started the conversation, Sahaba Ikram, Tabi'een, Itba'i Tabi'een, they didn't have to reveal their state of spirituality. If I'm not mistaken, they would stand and pray all night, and there was a young child, one of their neighbors, a child who would see them praying, and one night he thought it was a tree. Such was their level of concentration and focus, and correct me if I'm wrong, and essentially one night he wasn't there, and it was the father of the child who said that he's left the dunya. So they didn't have to tell people about their spirituality. Today we have to post it on Instagram, or the one that I use often in my speeches. I know I'm not on a speech mode today, but people take a snap and they'll put it up on their Snapchat of them being in the masjid, and then they write the caption, Rug life, not Tug life.
I've never seen that.
I've never heard that.
You've heard it now.
You've
heard. I've actually originated that one.
This Jummah you'll be seeing that on my
well, we're back on Alhamdulillah on duty.
Jummahs are back on, guys.
We're back on duty from this lockdown for Maulvis. We've been a bit redundant, to be honest. Na koi nikah, na koi khatam sharif, na koi janaza, as we normally.
Pockets are a bit.
Pockets are always full, Alhamdulillah. Kaun deta hai dene ko, muh chahiye dene wala hai sacha. Hamara Nabi.
Let me just put a disclaimer. We're not talking about Imam Adil here. If anyone assumes, he did use the word redundant.
but
it has
the-
financial connotation to the word
I was
redundant.
talking in the general
Just let him know he's
connotation.
been on furlough, innit?
Yeah.
Chalo,
So,
khair yaar.
you know, in many cases, you know,
Bahral,
very good point
alhamdulillah,
about rug life and thug life. You know, it's not about the rug
we
life.
have to we have
Oh,
to
thug life,
show we have to show our spirituality. And again, you know, we can't make them comparisons of people of spirituality and claimants of the Tassawuff of today who will pull the wool over the eyes of the masses with the greats of the past. You know, you can't make them comparisons. It's virtually
I
impossible.
think absolutely. And I tell you what, I'm going to bring it back to football because you actually you summed the discussion quite well. You've actually, if we was to flip this to the end of the discussion, this point now that I'd mentioned and Imam Adil just mentioned, I'm just going to simplify it even more. If you was to look at today's great Maulanas and Sheikhs, can you compare them to the ones in the past? You can't. You can't measure the level of today's to that level. You know, today, I don't want to go on a tangent and say Kalandar Doran and Ghauth Varan. You know, they give all these titles.
Al-Kabat,
You know, we give huge titles to our Peer Sabs and our Sheikhs and our Imams. Oh, he's the great Imam of our time. No doubt. Of our time, he's probably the great one. But when you put that in comparison to Habib al-Ajami, or Hassan al-Basri, or Bishr ibn al-Harith al-Hafi, or Imam al-Junaid, Junaid ibn Muhammad, or Sadi al-Sakati, or Ma'ruf al-Karhi, or these guys, man. There ain't no comparison, G.
But
There ain't no comparison to Al-Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa or Ghazali
just
or these
from a
guys.
local opinion kind of thing, isn't it? Do you not have to kind of define greatness based on the era that you're in? So at the times that you towards the personality
In comparison to them,
yeah, see
the standards were bigger.
Yeah, but now just for somebody to stick to their namaz or as you said read tahajjud and be at that level, for this era, that in itself is great.
That's a karamat in itself.
Yeah.
You know,
I
whereas
totally agree.
in that door, that would have been
The norm.
the norm and the standard. But in the times you're living in now, that is the great. So the thing about, yes, of course they don't compare, but we've got to remember that the times are different. Greatness then was different to what greatness is now.
True.
Absolutely, and where I mentioned football, you know, we can say today they're awesome footballers, but then the likes of Maradona and Pele, in their time, they were the best footballers. So it's very hard to draw comparisons between great spiritual sages or to draw comparisons of today to the past. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that the further away you will go from my time, the worse the state of people will become. And to find people of a good spiritual state today is a sign of that person's greatness. And people asking in the comments, I think, about how do you measure if this man was great or not, and just drop some names, Imam Adil. I've mentioned a few of the greats up until the time of the greatest of his time.
Dawood al-Ta'i, a student of Imam Abu Hanifa. Similarly, Abu Bakr al-Shibli, Ma'ruf al-Karhi, who you mentioned,
Abu Bakr al-Shibli.
Ibrahim bin Adham, like this, Dhunnun al-Misri, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. All of these are great Sufiya, Gnostics, from amongst, and the saintly men from amongst their eras and their time.
So did they spend their time in the science of hadith and fiqh and these things? Or
It goes without saying.
But what did they focus more on?
One cannot attain tasawwuf and spirituality and the rank of a Sufi without first being versed in the Sharia. This is something that we again in our day and age, and I know Chaudhry Sahab might rein us in on this one again, but we assume that there are two different discussions. That a Sufi is Sufi, the one who sits and does dhikr all day and reads his 5 daily prayer, and he might be sahib tahajjud, and an alim is an alim. But the reality is that one cannot attain spirituality without being first an adherent of Sharia. Yes,
Yeah,
that famous story of Hazrat Junaid Baghdadi from the early period comes to mind. An individual heard that he would fly in the sky and walk on water. So
They were kramas.
the karamat, and no doubt he did. But when he came to Baghdad and sat in his company for a few days, he didn't see any of that. He wanted to become his murid. He didn't see any of
He'd
that.
heard that Imam Junaid can walk on water and he can fly in the air, and he's coming with expectations. Like today, people hear this guy has cured so and so, and these things are happening, and we're going into that gathering expecting he's going to cure me now.
Yeah, but
I'm going to all of a sudden become.
मैं वो वाक्य में कही होना तो फिर अगे गल तोड़ने या the बाकायदा when they sat in their company for a few days they saw none of the things that they had heard about, no flying in the sky, no walking on water. And as he's about to walk away, Hazrat Junaid Baghdadi called them and said that during this time did you see me contradict any of the verses of the Quran? And they said no. And they said that did you see me contradict any of the ta'limat and the teachings and the ahadith mubarak of Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or leave out any of the sunnahs of Nabi Islam? And they said no. And they said this is my greatest miracle. So this is something which is consistent in every generation.
Which
those,
generation was this?
This
is
is
the
the
generation.
This is
This
generation.
is a generation, was just a point for yourself and others that are watching. This is a generation where there's no dispute.
Khairun nasi qarni.
Khairul Quruni Qarni. Yeah, Khairun Nasi.
Khairun Nasi, Bukhari Sharif word as well. Khairun Nasi Qarni, Thumma alladhina yalunahum, Thumma alladhina yalunahum. The best of people are my generation, first generation Sahaba. Then the generation after me, the generation of the Tabi'een. And then the generation after them, third generation, Itba'i Tabi'een. Yes? Arta tusani puri class mein Shaykh hai.
And these are the generations, these names that we mentioned, Junaid Baghdadi and Zunnus, the detractors, those who are opponents and against the Tassawuff, they have even acknowledged
the greatness
of these men. They said if you want to do Tassawuff, if you want to be spiritual, then go back to this generation, don't do anything else. So there's no dispute in what we're mentioning
The
here.
reason why I'm asking what generation it was, because I wanted to know the difference in generations in terms of how they defined somebody who's a Sufi, somebody who's a trustable source. And I was going to make the point before Imam Sahib started the what they were saying was, we today have made it our kind of standard that the only one who's true is the one that can show us something physically, the one who walks on water. That's why I asked the generation, because that was obviously in comparison to today a very long time ago.
आजकल मुरीदीन ज़्यादा करामात बयान करने नहीं बानी जैसे नहीं पी साहब
stories
नमाज पढ़ने
I tell you straight, we're storytellers.
Yeah.
You know, and Imam Ghazali, what did he say? If I'm not mistaken, even Abul Faraj Muhaddis Ibn al-Jawzi and others, what did they say in regards that whoever claims to walk on water, then he's a devil.
Data Sahib write the same in Kashmir.
Why did they write that? This level of walking and karamat, we shouldn't be demanding, expecting that.
This is why I'm saying that the theme that remains consistent in every generation, whether it's the first three that we just alluded to, or whether it's our time now, is that they must be steadfast upon Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
That is number one. And then number two is that they've got to have ilm. Hazrat Khwaja Sayyid Nizamuddin Awliya, Mahbub Ilahi, whose Yawm Ursin is in a few days, 17th of Rabiul Akhir, if I'm not mistaken. And by chance, tomorrow is the Yawm Visal of Imam Ghazali. Bihamdillah ta'ala. 14th of Rabiul Akhir. Tomorrow daytime will be the Yawm Visal, the day of the passing of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam, Mujaddid of his Dawr al-Zamana. Passed away in the year 505 AH, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, an individual who was basically in the middle of the mutaakhirin and the mutaqaddimeen. Yani he's somebody in the middle of that. And he had to deal with a lot of these false claimants of Tassawuff in his time. And he wrote the famous Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of religious sciences, and other great books on Tassawuff and spirituality, to give it that systemized approach and to make it clear who is wrong and who is right. So Imam Ghazali played a huge part in the development of Tassawuff right in the middle of the Mutaakhirin and Mutaqaddimin period. But as I was about to say, so what remains consistent in all generations, and the benchmark that we should, not the stories that we hear, but the benchmark that we should uphold and adhere to is, number one, they are adherents of Quran and Sunnah. Number two, they have knowledge. और नाम के लिहाज में हज़रत ख्वाजा सैयद निज़ामुद्दीन औलिया महबूब इलाही, they had 700 khulafa. and they wouldn't give khilafat to anyone. Ajkal isra khilafat deni jisra reviyan bandne na.
And khulafa mean deputies.
Yes.
These are the excellent ones from amongst the disciples, the ones that have been chosen.
Isra khilafat deni jisra reviyan bandne na. Khilafat is.
Laugh was. This is a joke. We meant to laugh here.
No, I've already laughed.
No, he's in serious mode today. He's here to learn, mashallah. I'm actually surprised he hasn't bought his notebook and pen.
No, his afzaz very good.
Acha, chalo inshallah.
His memory is very good.
अगले हफ्ते क्लास 9 है हमारी.
नहीं आज शाम इस तो बाद इम्तिहान लेने हैं ना. बहरहाल 700 khulafa. One of them Hazrat Khwaja Amir Khusro. Everyone's heard Amir Khusro. They get kalam in Qawwali, so on and so forth. And one of them was
the one who they say found Qawwali as well.
Sirajuddin Uthman Nizami rahmatullah alayh, who was Sahib Hidayatul Nahav. They were also one of the murids. They wanted to give them khilafat, but they hadn't completed their studies of Dars Nizami. Hazrat Fakhruddin Zarradi rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, who was a senior Khalifa of Mahbub Ilahi, they said, give me him for 6 months, yani I'll take him under my wing for 6 months, I'll teach him what he needs to learn, and then you can test him. If he meets your criteria, you give him khilafat. 6 mahine baad ayn, and they took the exam. Hazrat Sirajuddin Uthman Nizami rahmatullah alayh, Sahib Hidayatul Nahav, a book that we study in the 2nd or 3rd year of Dars Nizami. They took the exam, they were impressed, they were happy, and then they gave khilafat. Meaning that knowledge is the benchmark of Tassawuff.
So what about this, there's this cultural thing now. Obviously, we're all Pakistani. Pakistan, mashallah, there's a lot of peers, there's a lot of darbars. This saying that we hear, Sare Peer Sahab, ilmi peer nahi hain, amli peer hain.
Wow.
And it gets rid of that thing that when you ask, tu sana peer na bayan kya hai?
Yeah.
What do they, where do we take teachings from them? Where can we learn something? So, and am I right in saying that there is such a thing as just amli peer?
Based on what Imam Adil just said now, and this is not his view. Bear in mind what Imam Adil or myself are mentioning here. This is what we've read, this is what we've studied, this is what we've learned, this is what the aqwal of our Salaf and Aslaf were. And when you take that into account, a person can say, yeah, I practically embody Islam, and that's it. And the argument is, if you're practically strong in your deen, then that practice has come from sound, grounded knowledge. Do you understand? But today we expect that, so-and-so guide or so-and-so, sheikh, he's big because of how many murids he's got. Or because of how many murids his grandfather had. Like he said, the benchmark ain't that. The benchmark is knowledge is the first step. That you are proficient and sound in your seeking knowledge. And Imam Malik said that Man tafakkaha wa lam yatasawwaf faqad tafassak. And then he also said, the one whom has studied but has no spirituality, that individual is misguided. The one who has spirituality, the one who has spiritual woman, tasawwafa wa lam yatafakkah faqad tazandak. Whoever is spiritual but has no knowledge, that individual is deviant, he's heretical. He said the one who has man tasawwafa wa yatafakkaha, the one who's studied and has spirituality, faqad tahakkak, that individual has made it. He is the one on the right path. He is on the path of guidance.
Just on...
So, you need to have knowledge, and without knowledge, Mare Peer Sahab Bare Amli and Maghrib time, you ain't even get up to pray Salam.
आजकल बड़ा ट्रेंड है amongst subcontinent, Indian continent पीर साहब्स जा बैठे दीना विच ताने जी अस पढ़ने नमाज मदीना विच. I'm sorry if I'm mincing some of my words.
No, बस भी समझ लगी कि ये तो सच्ची गल की थी.
अमली क्या यार? If I was to give a practical example, DVLA will not give you a driving license until you've done theory and practical.
Absolutely.
So your theory is knowledge, sitting with the ulama at their feet, Yeah, आजकल ना knowledge नहीं that sit at the screen and study from the University of Google, the Maulana Facebook, the Sheikh Twitter. I know Imam Sir told me not to go into speech mode, but दौरान बयान थोड़ा मुझे बाकायदा इस तरीके
दौरान बयान हो जाता है.
हाँ वो तो फिर एक inevitable है ना. वो मौलवी साहब की mic दियो ना, they call it microphonism. वो सन एक बीमारी है. We go into natural mode. तो knowledge is theory, and then amal, as you were saying, that is practical. So once you have theory and practical, then DVLA will give you driving license. So if you don't have,
how many years did they say that it took them to understand and memorize Surah Al-Baqarah? Memorizing one thing, understanding. They go, we didn't move 10 years, we were on Baqarah. Meaning, just to understand and implement that. You know, we need to, when we've studied something, we need to implement that. The implementation of knowledge is key. You know, like he said, you know, you can't get a license. You're not licensed until you've put it into practice. Dauta, he studied for how many years? And then they go, why you not going to make your school? You studied with the best teacher, Imam Azam Abu Hanifa. He says, no, because I prefer the saintly life. I prefer the simple life. So he spent his entire rest of his life acting upon what he learned. You see, there's 2-3 types of land. There's a land which you irrigate, and that land bears no fruit. Irrigation here means to learn, studies. But he doesn't act upon it, that land is futile. It doesn't give no fruit. Then there's another piece of land where you irrigate, you water, the crops grow, it starts, but nobody takes the fruit, but that land benefits from the fruit. That's a person who studies and only benefits himself. Then there's a piece of land which you irrigate, you give water, you give everything, it starts to give fruit, and others come and benefit from the fruit. That's the example of that person who studied and then gives out that knowledge.
See, knowledge is the first step. Yeah, ilm being the first step. Now, ilm is what you know as an individual, and amal is what other people can see. Yeah. Now, my question is that if I'm looking for a sheikh, or say for example somebody wants to differentiate between who is really good and who is, you know, on their own vibe, because amal is all we can see. What ilm somebody else has got, what knowledge you have got, I cannot physically see on you up until you speak. So my question is that the person who's got the ilm, but then they decide that the amal side of it is going to be to themselves. Like you mentioned, the crops, they're not going to give out to the community. Where's that person standing? Is it something that once they've got that knowledge, part of the amal needs to be that they then give it out?
But the whole purpose of seeking knowledge and the whole purpose of spirituality is that you don't show people what you do.
No, but you can teach them what you learn.
Bishar Hafi Rahmatullah Alayhi he said beautifully, didn't he? We're talking about the first 3 generations here, the Salaf Salihin. What did he say?
Bishar
Hide your
Hafi,
good deeds.
Name we didn't take, mashallah, and now mashallah.
Oh no, I took his name.
Oh, you did you?
You weren't listening, Imam Adil. I did take. How can me of all the people, miss the name of Sayyidina Bishar on that?
Wow.
The man who, you know,
so
he
took the name again. Alhamdulillah, Iman Taza ho gaya.
You know, this one guy, man, you don't know, bro, how great he was. Just level of this guy. You know, his story is just his story is life.
You would have heard their story. They were in a state of drunkenness, saw a piece of paper, picked it up.
Yes.
Famous story.
And then Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal would sit in their gatherings. On the mountains of knowledge, like Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal sit at the feet of
Imam of his
Bishop,
time.
then you know that man has something in him. Yes, and he's an embodiment of Tassawuff and spirituality.
And what did he say? He said, hide your good deeds just as you would hide your bad deeds. But that's a level of sincerity and action that... You know, how you hide your bad deeds.
It's not understandable in today's door. In today's door, you wouldn't...
नहीं आज का social media का दौर है यार.
You know, today, it's more of value to show that you're a Sufi
I'm doing Umrah.
rather than be a Sufi. Yeah.
You know, it's mutasawwif.
One thing I want to throw in here...
mustaswif.
One thing I want to throw in here, that a true Sufi will not tolerate any form of insult against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yet at tasawwufini, that you stay in your astana, you stay in your darbar, you stay in your kamra, like Amirul Mujahideen would often say, उत्थे भी तो तुस अपनी तस्वीर रो लो तो बड़े बड़े डिग्नेटरीज तो बड़े बड़े इस तरीके नाल वज़रा अच्छन तो representatives of tasawwuf when in reality the
honor of our Nabi and Rasul, the
enemies
founder
of Islam are dishonoring the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Us tasawwuf na kya fir fayda? The
Like,
greatest Sufi, Dalil. You know, Imam Sahib Jazbat. The greatest Sufi was who? Imam Sahib may have his own. Maulai Kainat, de maqam wa martaba wara'ul wara. Yes? He is Shenshai Vilayat, there is no doubt in that. But the great Data Sahib.
Imam Sahib is a podcast. Please refrain from raising your voice like this.
It just dislocated my
podcast,
shoulder.
Mawzu aisa hai. You bring me on these topics.
Don't bring it to
the
pump
blood
you
is
up,
boiling in my body.
That's it, you're
Great
fired.
Sufi was who? Data Sahib mentioned in the Kashf al-Mahjub. Afdalul Bashar Ba'd al-Anbiya bit-tahqiq. Yare ghar yare mazaz
Ijma' of the Ummah.
Sayyidina
Ijma' of the
Abu
Ummah.
Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu. Greatest Sufi. And when he came to the Aqidah of the Khatm Nabuwat of Rasul Akram sallallahu, did Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq remain
of the
silent?
Sahaba?
Did he remain, because Dawr Khilafat he was Amirul Mu'mineen, Khalifatul Rasul.
He led
Did
from
he
the
remain? Did he remain silent? Did he not dispatch an army? Did they not fight against Musaylimah Kazzab? So the reality is what? That a Sufi can only be a Sufi when he upholds the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
That's one aspect.
और दूसरी गाल सब हमारे हैं. All of them upon Aqidah Ahl Sunnati wal Jamaat.
That's very important.
You said that what is the criteria of looking for a Peer Sahib? Ala Hazrat mentioned in the Fatawa Afriqiya, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, one of the Fatawas, that Baqaida, one of the 4 conditions of a Murshid Kamil, Peer Kamil, is that they have Sahih Aqidah. Yes? Yani the Aqidah is Aqidah Ahl Sunnati wal Jamaat. Ajkal Peer Pyramid trying to prove the Iman of Sayyidina Abu Talib, Janabi Abu Talib. Others who are saying that Sayyidina Ali is greater than Sayyidina Abu Bakr, or Sayyidina Fatima, without Bator Ishara. Sayyidina Fatima is greater. Sayyidina Fatima is greater than the whole of Kainat, including the rest of the Anbiya, Mursaleen, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, without going into detail of who said what and when did they say it. So this is, you stick to the status quo. You stick to the ijma of the Ahl Sunnati wal Jamaat.
You know the
and Asal Aqidah, you'll find that
the constitution. There's a constitution. Big organizations, everything. This Jama'at, the Ahl Sunnah, which is the correct interpretation of Islam, it has a constitution by which we all have to uphold and follow. If you go against that constitution, then there's a problem. And if views and verdicts, there can be opinions, but those opinions are just secondary, or just they're an opinion of an imam or select imams. But it's not the constitution, it's not the principle, it's not the law within that constitution. So a man who you take as a guide to guide you in your matters and affairs has to be a man who follows the Sunni constitution, who acts upon what he knows. He does amal upon his ilm. Is a sahibul ilm. So he's not a fasik. He's not somebody who doesn't practice what he preaches. Is somebody who is
musalsal chain,
no,
hand in hand.
That's the 4th one. The 3rd one, what did I just mention now?
Knowledge.
He has to be grounded with sound knowledge, sound belief, action upon belief, not somebody who's openly sinning and doing sins, and an individual whose chain goes back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam without any link missing, which we'll come into the discussion of shajara and silsilas and chains and stuff.
Just before we move forward, I want to pick up on a point that Imam Sahib mentioned in regards to, though I'm not debating anything, I just I want a bit more further knowledge on it. When we mentioned door and age and the way things work in our era, you mentioned Sayyidina Siddiq Akbar, when in their door, when there was an insult towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that their actions, and how can somebody be a man of Tassawuff and be a Sufi, that when it comes to these kind of things, lekin we've already acknowledged that the definition of what is great changes with time. My question is that the action then taken when something like this happens, can that not be different compared to what we could do to defend in those times and what we can do now to defend?
But this is a consistent theme in our discussions. We can't make them comparisons with the first 2, 3, 4 that was an example.
No, but yeah, that's what
that
I'm
was
saying.
an example
Yeah.
to support what I'm saying. If somebody says that a Sufi, you're saying a Sufi is that individual who does not accept any insult against the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba or Ali Rasul, Ahlul Bayt Athar and Awliya Kamilin, that was just an example, a dalil to support the da'wah.
Okay.
Yes? Not
So
to
their
say that
action
is,
on the
that
action
is the
on
rule.
that. The action on that insult, like as in they won't accept it, that's fine, they've acknowledged they're not going to accept it, but then their action on that does not dictate how much of a Sufi they are. Or is it the opposite?
No, you're right. Look, there's it's quite simple. My view and opinion, my mother might disagree with this, and others as well might be watching disagree with this. It comes down to approach. How you deal with something. There's two ways. This was even prevalent amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. When the prisoners of war were captive after the Battle of Badr, there were two opinions. One was execute them. For these are the enemies of Islam, and these are individuals who in reality have no good in them for us. We've given them chances, they've turned up, they should be executed, the prisoners
Numerous,
of war. And the second approach was of whom? Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Look, why don't we do this? Why don't we ask them to free themselves by teaching our children the Arabic language and strengthening them in the Arabic language? Both were valid approaches.
But different times dictate different approaches. That was when the Prophet ﷺ were physically amongst the Sahaba Ikram. It was just after the Battle of Badr Sharif, and that suggestion was made. But that very same Sayyiduna Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Afdalul Bashar Ba'd al-Anbiya bit-Tahqiq, Yari Ghar Yari Mazar, Baqaida, they made, the Qaida was what? As soon as they became Khalifa, the Qaida was that whoever fought in the Battle of Badr will not have to fight during my Dawr Khilafat. But when it came to Maslai Aqidah Khatme Nabuwat, defending the honor of the finality of the prophethood of Rasulullah, they made a U-turn on that.
But Maulana Imam Adil Sahab, they had to. This is the truth is if they didn't do that, if they didn't stand for that issue, stand up for that issue and defend that issue, then what was the Ba'am precedence? It occurred so early that they had to stamp it out from the beginning. As soon as Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam passes away, two people, Aswad al-Ansi and Musaylima, claim prophethood. People have done riddat, they've apostatized and they've left Islam, or the Messenger of Allah has gone, we're not Muslim no more. This is what they believe. This is what happened in the historically what happened in the early days of Islam after Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam's departure. Question now, fast forward to 1400 years ago. How would you approach that now? It's a matter of approach. Some would go down the more staunch and stricter view. Others would say, look, we've got to be diplomatic here.
Without getting into this discussion of which approach is right, would that approach suit this Dawr Zamana, my point was what? That the greatest Sufi of all time, after in the Ummah of Rasulullah is Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And we have this evidence to support that when it came to defending the honor of Rasulullah, which is a primary condition of being a Sufi. I'm saying that a person, if you go into that discussion, Peace Sayyid Meher Ali Shah Sahab, Tajdar Golra Sharif, Shanshahi Vilayat, there's no doubt in that, yes. But when it came to debating the Clown of Qadian, they didn't take an AK-47 or take that approach.
That's my point.
But that's what I'm saying. Different eras demand different approaches. My point was what? That when it comes in order to be a true Sufi, we said knowledge, we said amal, we said adhering to Quran and Sunnah. I've thrown it in there to make it clear to people, because this is something which is prevalent in recent times. We've seen it in Mulk Pakistan with what's going on with the caricatures that the French government have endorsed and supported. What I'm trying to say is a true Sufi.
The bare minimum.
The bare minimum.
Words out. The bare minimum, at least.
Maybe you can't do a munazara. Maybe you can't go out and fight against the enemy. The bare minimum is that put a statement up on Facebook.
Yeah.
The bare minimum is
that you should make it known that this has hurt you, this has offended you.
Milad Sharif if you're not going to defend the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Kya Yarvi Sharif if you're not going to defend the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what I'm saying.
This is a fundamental tenet of our deen. In order to be a Muslim, if you're a true Muslim, leave Tassawuff to one side even a true Muslim, you will feel the pain
It's the bare minimum to feel that pain.
To feel that pain. We know that it's not going to affect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is above all of this. These are the thoughts of the minds of these people.
It's
Nabi
a test
salatu-
for us.
But it's our. That what on the day of judgment, what face shall we show? What face shall we show to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam when if this situation arose in our time, we've not gone down certain routes, but what we have done was we was vocal. Ya Rasulullah, we did not accept and tolerate. Our tolerance level was for you on this matter.
And
We will
in
not even
essence,
accept. And
as a Muslim, we're doing ourselves a favor by putting ourselves in the position that when that day comes, we can say we stood up. Asa jitni asni kabiliyat hai si, we said what we could say. Yes, we couldn't. Asa munazire karne na kone sakabal, lekin we let the
just
world
on
know
this
we were
point,
offended.
You know, Maulana Hafiz Khadim Hussain Rizvi Sahab, Rahmatullah alayhi, he actually excelled everyone.
Yeah, 100%.
He was at the other end of the spectrum of showing you. This is why you can't follow him. That's why people are
أصل
turning
ولاية
into.
يهي نفرة. أصل
But not
ولاية
everyone
يهي.
can do that though.
لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. That you don't fear anything or anyone, nor do you grieve anything or any the loss of anyone. So this is what we're trying to say, that a true Sufi in every era has knowledge, is grounded in the ta'limat of Quran and Sunnah, and is an individual who upholds the honor of the Prophet ﷺ, does not accept any form of insult against the Prophet ﷺ. Asal Tassawuff and embodying the true teachings of Tassawuff, this is what we're trying to get across to our Nazreen wa Sami'een, our brothers and sisters who are watching and listening.
Moving the conversation on that, we've touched on Tassawuff, spirituality. I mean, this is a topic that we can talk all night on. Moving on, we've looked at some of the great sages, some of the great Sufiya from the early generations, the first three generations, the Salaf Salihin. Then we come to the first 200 years involved fiqh and the establishment of hadith from 200
Ilmul
to 300, 300 to 400, Ilmul Kalam, Imam al-Bayhaqi, the likes of Sayyidina Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, Sayyidina Abu al-Hasan al-Ashari. These great Imams came. Then we see that after the 400 years, we've started, scholars have emerged in this, what I would believe like a great generation, a golden generation, where Islam is now established. You know, the empires are across the world, the Muslim empires are stemmed across the world, and, you know, Baghdad is vibrant. It's now become the capital. The Muslim capital of the center of the Muslim world is Baghdad. All great scholars are studying there. All great scholars are visiting there, traveling there. You know, the fuyuz and barakat of Baghdad Sharif go all the way back to the likes of Abdullah bin Mas'ud and Umar bin al-Khattab radiyallahu anhum. Why? Because they focused. You know, Iraq became quite a central focal point within Muslim history there. You know, the libraries in Iraq, the libraries in Baghdad especially. And we find that in the year 450, Sayyidina Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi was born. We will do a dedicated podcast to Imam Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam. And we know that 10 years after or 20 years after, 470 Hijri, Sayyidina Qutb al-Rabbani, Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, this great Imam was born. And then we see the likes of Muhaddith Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, who was in that time as well, who wrote a great book on this, Talbisul Iblis, you know, on books of Tassawuff. And just Imam Adil, if I may ask, some of the great early books on this subject and science, like
But
the
just
early
before
books.
the time of Al-Ghauth al-Azam was the time of Dat Ali Hujweri. Sayyid Ali bin Uthman al-Hujweri, Shanshay, Lahore, Data ka Mazar, everyone goes there. They wrote the famous book,
Kashful Mahjoob.
Yes, the unveiling of the veil. And similarly, I think it was really these 2-3 individuals that you mentioned where they...
Abul Qasim al-Qushayri, Risala Qushayriya.
Risala Qushayriya before Kashful Mahjoob, how can we forget? But it was really these great proponents of Tassawuff who wrote the works like Ihya Ulumuddin and other works written by Imam Ghazali. And then we have يعني مكاشفة القلوب,
Abu Talib Makki.
Abu Talib al-Makki's Qut al-Qulub, and similarly then Pirane Pir wrote so many works on Tassawuff, such as the one that we have here,
Rabbani, Sirrul Asrar.
Sirrul Asrar, the secret of secrets, and then we have the individuals who would come after them who also worked in this particular field as well. A contemporary of Ghauth al-Azam is who? Khwaja Gharib Nawaz, Naib Rasul Ata'un Nabi, Hazrat Khwaja Sayyid Mu'inuddin Ajmeri Sanjri Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayh. So this became a golden period in the Indian subcontinent primarily, and around the Muslim world, of the emergence of these great Sufi masters and Gnostics. Some that we mentioned, and no doubt there are many others as well. And something that I just want to say, we had this discussion last week on Muslim revolutionaries. Sometimes we might not mention the name of an individual. That doesn't mean we're disrespecting them in any way. Like a person messaged me on Instagram and said, you were talking about revolutionaries in the UK and you didn't mention Tangri Sharif's Qibla Pir Habibur Rahman Sahab. Oi sakna, human nature, you forget the name at the time, but that doesn't mean we disrespect anyone. Similarly, in these discussions, if we've mentioned the Awliya and we've left out one or two, that doesn't mean we disrespect or disregard them in any way. So I just thought I'll mention that for the purpose of doing tarbiyat and educating some people. So we love and honor all of the Awliya. This is the way of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. And we find numerous and countless examples. We should have actually started the discussion with this in the Quran of Awliya. Asim bin Barkhiyya, the Wazir of Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salam, and that gives us the dalil that the foundation of Tassawuff is knowledge. Yes. Similarly, Ashabe Kahf, the dog that stayed outside the cave for 309 years, and they were adherents of spirituality from the previous nations. And no doubt Allah Almighty mentions their greatness in the Quran, and the greatness of the dog as well, and his nisbat with the awliya. Similarly, Sayyidah Maryam, yes, Sayyidah Maryam, not a nabiya, a waliya. Yes, women can't be prophets. That's from amongst our fundamental bunyadi i'tiqad. Only men were chosen to be prophets of Allah, messengers of Allah. But Sayyidah Maryam, out of season fruits when Zakaria alayhi salam came. So these examples of Tassawwuf and Awliya and the friends of Allah, and then the mentioning of the Awliya in the Quran, Surah Yunus, in the famous verses, Ala inna awliya Allahi la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun alladhina amanu wa kanu yattaqun lahumul bushra fil hayati dunya wa fil akhirah la tabdila li kalimatillah dhalika huwal fawzul azim. So we find, and so what I'm trying to say is that those who reject spirituality and they say we don't accept in these awliya and it's all hocus pocus and patani where these Sunnis get their stories from and this that, and the other, and unaki sirf langar na pya babaji, let's get everyone together, tell a few karama, tell a few stories, and we're going to come to this, and let's have a big knees up and have a kind of 3-course langar meal. But that is not what it is. This reality of Tassawwuf that we find from the Quran, from the ta'limat of Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which we alluded to earlier, which I've just mentioned now as well. And it was this period, 5th century going into 6th century after Hijri, where the likes of Imam Ghazali and al-Ghauth al-Azam, Abdullah al-Rafa'i and others, Ahmad al-Rafa'i, my apologies, Ahmad al-Rafa'i and others, they excelled and took the works of the earlier proponents of Tassawwuf and adherents of spirituality and took it to the next level, basically. Took it to the next level.
Yeah, so we see that these were some of the books that were written. So this generation, where we're talking 5th century, it was actually a bridge between, like you said, the early times, and they were moving Islam into the new era, the new times, the new generations to come. And the scholars that stood out were the likes of Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, who was an imam in the Hanbali school. He was actually an imam in the Hanbali school.
Muqallid of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal.
Ahmad bin Hanbal. And you had Imam Ghazali, who was 20 years his senior. Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali,
who was a Muqallid of Imam Shafi'i,
who was a follower of Imam Shafi'i and one of the great imams within the school. He actually propelled himself. He qualified to become one of the the revivers and one of the key teachers within the school as well. Then you had Ibn al-Jawzi as well, who was against some of what was happening at that time, what people said, and then later retracted.
I think a lot of the early issues in relation to, I mean, we saw it, and Datasa mentioned this a lot in the Kashf al-Mahjub, false claimants of spirituality. People who were wearing the libas, wearing the clothing, but from inside they were empty and hollow.
Charlatans.
Charlatans, yes.
Charlatans,
Yes.
con artists, fakes, people who look the part but are actually far from the truth. They are far from the reality. And a lot of what has been written against Tassawuff, Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, even Hafiz Muhaddith, Ibn al-Jawzi, who later retracted, a lot of what they've wrought against this was against the innovations that were being done. It wasn't, and if you, let's just bring, say for example, Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah into this discussion. Ibn Taymiyyah, a figure who is somewhat controversial, people have a lot of difference of opinion in regards to him, his impact on what he did and what he believed and stood for. For example, take him now. He writes against a lot of the innovations that were happening under the guise of Tasawwuf spirituality. Yet he praises Sayyidina Qutb al-Rabbani, Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, like he's not praised anyone in that book. He says that I'm a murid of his as well. I'm a disciple of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. So we have to understand that when people are against, they're against some of the innovations that develop within that. And we have to be vocal against that. If there's things that are happening which go against the Quran and Sunnah, under the name of Tasawwuf, it needs to be spoken out against. It needs to be made clear. This is not part of Tasawwuf. This is not spirituality. This is not the spirituality of Imam al-Junaid or the likes of, Sayyid al-Ta'ifa, who was the Imam of the Sharia and Tariqah. This was one of the greatest Imams. And it's very important to mention that point. Now, about Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, a lot has been written, a lot has been said. If you was to go away and read upon him, a lot has been said about Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani. What is it that makes him so special, Imam Adil?
I think there's two things that stand out for me personally after years of reading their biographies, the books of Tabaqat and Tarikh and doing Bayanat and so on and so forth. Number one is the message that their mother gave to them. Everyone knows the story of the 40 pieces of gold coin and how her name was Ummul Khair, Sayyidah Fatima. Her lineage goes back to Imam Ali Maqam, Imam Hussain, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Nawasai Rasul Nabika Nuri Ain. And she was instrumental in the development and early tarbiyat of Pirane Pir Shanshaye Vilayat, Sayyidina Shaykh Sayyid Abdul Qadir al-Jilani al-Hassani wal-Hussaini. Father was who? Abu Musa Saleh, Jangi Dost, Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayh, who was a great wali in his own right. We all know the famous story of the apple that he ate, that he shouldn't have ate, and then followed the apple back to the house. And it was the house of Shaykh Sayyid Abdullah Sumi, Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayh. And doing ishara towards that, again, it's not a bayan, it's a podcast. And I'm just trying to keep things concise. So when he was 18 years old, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani Muhyiddin Abu Muhammad, he radiyallahu ta'ala anhu asks his mother for permission to go and study, as Imam Sahib alluded to, the center of Islamic learning at that time, which was Baghdad. And he was in Algiers, which was a region in Iran, Baghdad in modern day Iraq. So mother granted him permission. Father left 80 pieces of gold coin as inheritance. 40 was given to his brother. Did you know?
No,
he had a brother by the name of Abdullah, and that's probably where I said Abdullah al-Rafai, but it's Ahmad al-Rafai, of course. But Abdullah and Abdul Qadir, two brothers, yes? So 40 were given to Abdullah and 40 to Abdul Qadir, and 40 was sewed into a pocket under his arm. And what was the advice and nasiha his mother gave? Always speak the Truth. No matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the situation is, beta hamesha sach bol. Yes, always speak the truth. And it was this advice, later he writes in one of his works, he said that it was this advice that propelled me in the realm and in the field of Tassawuff. So speaking the truth. Today we find a lot of claimants of Tassawuff who base their claims on lies. And we're going to come to this later, but I'll throw his name in, and I know this will wake you up. This Gohar Shahi individual.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, from wherever he is, London, Pasa or jo kuch
The moon.
The ye baqaida
You know
all
about
day.
him.
Well, we'll leave that bit to you. Yes, this individual basing all of his what do you call it claims. Pata nahi aajkal un nawa claim kadya that the hadith sharif of Sayyidina Umar kissing the Hajr Aswad. We kiss it because we saw the Prophet. And he goes, Ma'adallah, summa ma'adallah. Somebody brought it to my attention here a couple of days ago. That he says, oh, the reason why we kiss the Hajr Aswad is because of Gohar Shahi who's inside the Hajr Aswad. Yani his tasveer, his pictures there. And aajkal ye banawat or we charlatans and fraudsters as you alluded to. So someone who lies cannot be a Sufi. This is what we're saying. Sayyidina Muhyiddin, that Sayyidina Muhyiddin Abu Muhammad, they baqaida lived by this principle of always speaking the truth. And we know that this is from amongst the names of the Prophet. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was referred to as Al-Amin and As-Sadiq, the trustworthy one, the truthful one. Yes. So honesty, alaykum bis-sidq, fa inna sidqa yahdi ila al-birr, wa inna al-birra yahdi ila al-jannah. Sahih Muslim Sharif ki riwayat, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, speaking the truth is obligatory upon you. For speaking the truth leads to virtue, and virtue leads to the gardens of paradise. Ye jannat ka rasta hai. Yes, and unfortunately today many of us have built our lives upon lies.
Yep.
Alfaz par tawajjo. Many of us have built our lives upon lies. When we're filling in the benefit form, there's just by chance our pen slips and we tick the wrong box and we convince ourselves, no, I'm entitled to it. And we all take the moral high ground when we're amongst our friends, but we're all eating benefits from the government, you know, and then we say we are adherents of Tassawuff or we follow these great Sufiya. Following them doesn't mean just turning up to the Yadvi Sharif once a month. It means implementing their teachings into your life, implementing their ta'limat into your lives, becoming true reflections and embodiments of these great men of Allah. Yes, having that nisbat by taking their name has great value, great weight, but just taking their name isn't sufficient. Becoming true reflections of them is what is necessary here. So the first thing that we learn, and then the famous story when they were stopped, the caravan was stopped in Baghdad. It was stopped at, just before Baghdad, a place called Hamadan. The caravan was stopped there. 60 highway robbers. They take everything that the individuals who are in the caravan, they take all their possessions, and then they come to this 18-year-old Abdul Qadir. Yes, what do you have? He goes, 40 pieces of gold coin. Where do you have it? Under my sleeve, a secret pocket that my mother. And they laughed at him. And then they, long story short, they took him to the leader of the highway robbers. You've heard this story, right? And they took him to they took him to the leader of
हमारी क्या औकात है?
हाँ बेशक वो he said.
So they took him to the leader of the highway robbers. He heard asked the same question, heard the same answer. There and then he falls at the feet of Sayyidina Abdul Qadir. Why did you say this? You could have kept quiet, got away. My mother told me, always speak the truth.
So what we're saying is that,
so the first thing you said, what do we learn from his life? What's his legacy? Speaking the truth. And to answer the question before we come on, number 2 is knowledge, which has been the theme throughout our discussion today. That you can't be a Muslim reviver in any century, in any generation, if you don't have knowledge. He spent 33 years seeking ilm, ulum zahiriya and ulum batiniya. Yes, and the different narrations, they spent 12. They spent 12 years outside Baghdad, or 10 years in the company of Sayyidina Khadr alayhi salam, yani Hidr alayhi salam, and eating leaves and surviving. A lot of these things are beyond human intellect. But certainly what it goes without saying is that they studied these sciences, internal and external, and then 33 years seeking knowledge, and then 40 years teaching knowledge as well. Producing scholars. I was reading today, 400 elite scholars of that time. and not
direct
just
students of
direct
Dr.
students of Sayyidina Shaykh Sayyid Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. और आजकल ने लज्जू पज्जू इमाम नहीं जिन्हें आजकल बने हुए दो किताबा पढ़ी तो बस अपने आप बड़े शेखुल इस्लाम समझे.
We're saying, Ali, we're saying this is prior to, the Dars in Islamic structure which was developed,
a few centuries later.
Nizamuddin al-Mulk, when they developed this syllabi for people to study through, to be considered a graduate, a learned, a scholar, some sort of formal methodology. We're talking prior to that. The knowledge that Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani studied and sought. And about this, one of his levels of spirituality, a famous story that even Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah narrates. He even narrates that this story about Sayyidina Qutb al-Rabbani when he was out in the outskirts of Baghdad prior to his entry and arrival into Baghdad, where he was encountered by the devil. Now the devil can come in different forms. And the devil came in the form of light now and said, what a great man you are. What a great man you are.
Claiming to be God.
You're claiming, and yes, he was claiming that I am God. Shaitan. And I'm telling you that, you don't need to worship me anymore. You have done enough worship to last a lifetime. And Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani responded and said, وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And all of a sudden, this light turned to darkness and descended upon Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani and said, wow, how did you know? They said, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge from the accursed devil. When the devil came down, he said, well, how fascinating is your knowledge that you knew it was me. And they said, وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. That all power and strength is only from Allah. And when the devil heard this, he said that your knowledge saved you. And they said, no. If you did not say this to the best of creation, then who are you to tell me to stop praying to Allah now? Meaning, it was knowledge that saved him, and not just knowledge. The second part was the knowledge that saved him from the devil. But in reality, it was the fadl and karam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
هذا من فضل ربي.
It was from the divine grace of Allah Almighty upon Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani that he was able to be protected from the devil at that moment. And Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah mentions this and says that, look, anyone who claims anything otherwise, how can you reach these levels? How can you reach these high levels of spiritual states if it's not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Everything you receive ultimately is from whom? Allah Jalla wa ala. And when we look at Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, you mentioned his truthfulness. You mentioned knowledge, درست العلم حتى صرت قطبا, which is one of his famous sayings, lines within his poetry, which is attributed to him. درست العلم حتى صرت قطبا. I sought knowledge until I became the pole of my time, became the leading scholar and saint of my time. And then the hundreds of thousands that repented on his hands, the thousands that reverted to Islam, Jews and Christians, the countless number of wa'az and lectures and talks that he delivered to the hundreds of thousands of masses in Baghdad.
I think certainly what contributes to their legacy is how they would prepare their murideen to be from amongst the soldiers, the mujahideen in the army of Sultan Salahuddin
who was a contemporary of that time. So you had Imam Ghazali, Ibn al-Jawzi, Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. You had all of these giants
in the same time.
Khwaja Gharib Nawaz, 9.7, 9.8 million Hindus directly or indirectly came into Islam upon their hands. Khwaja Gharib Nawaz, Mere Khwaja, Aapke Khwaja, Sabke Khwaja. We are who we are today because of Khwaja Gharib Nawaz, khas taur in the Indian subcontinent. And there was a mulaqat between them as well. Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani and Khwaja Gharib Nawaz, there was a mulqat between them and a Qawali Mahfil as well. And the Zameen, this is mentioned in Mehr Munir, one of the biographies of P. Sayyid Mehr Ali Shah Sahib Rahmatullahi alayhi, and that the earth began to shake. The heavyweights from amongst the Awliya, the earth began to shake. And Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani took the Asam Mubarak, the blessed staff, and struck it into the ground and commanded the ground to remain firm. Yes.
But Imam Adil, like these stories, now, I mean, there's a lot of stories that we read and hear about Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, and people watching will say that, it's irrational, it doesn't make sense. How do you how would you explain rationally such occurrences? And then that's the first point. And the second point is the reliability. How reliable are these sources? How reliable are these stories? You know, a lot of we for decades now in this country have narrated so many stories of Huzur Ghawth Azam radiallahu an about him, that how do we know what is said is reliable? Like, how do we know if a hadith is what the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said or not? There's a jarh wa ta'deel,
there's a whole science to determine whether it's sahih or hasan or da'if or so on and so forth.
And usul behind this. Likewise, when we narrate stories of awliya, for the obviously the viewers and listeners who are here, a lot of them may say, well, you know, it's irrational, it don't make sense this. How logically does it make sense? How can you be sat and the earth shakes, etc., etc.? You know, could it have been an earth? I've had people who've asked me these questions genuinely. You know, normal people who says, listen, it doesn't make sense. Logically, it does not make sense to me. And the reliability of this, that whether these narrations are reliable, where are the reliable sources to gain these narrations from? What's your input and take on that?
I think with the first part of the discussion or the question that you've asked in regards to whether the source is reliable or not. Sorry, my apologies. The rationality, yes. I think with a lot of this, it's based upon faith. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. So one characteristic of the muttaqeen in the early part of Surah, in the opening of Surah Al-Baqarah is what? That they are those who believe in the matters of the unseen. So it might not make sense to you and me rationally, but the reality is that where intellect and rationality ends, that's when faith and iman begins. Like for example, the example we give in these discussions is regarding the wiping of the khufs, yes, the leather socks. Now we know that when you wear your leather socks 24 hours for a resident and 72 hours for a musafir, you wipe on the top. But Sayyidina Ali said what? That aql dictates, rationality dictates, or being rational dictates, that you would wipe your leather socks, your khuffain, from the bottom, because that's where the dirt gathers. Yes, that's where the dirt gathers. But they said that where aql ends, that's where ittiba'un nabi begins.
But then Imam Adil, just to evolve and carry this on, you know, then came the scholars of kalam, the mutakallimin, those. When we have faith in Allah Jalla wa Ala, what was the need for that then? Why have the likes of Abu Hasan al-Ashri, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, Imam Ghazali, who had to rationally prove the existence of Allah?
Because there was a lot of influence from the Greek philosophers. There was obviously the itarazat of the Mu'tazila, Karamiya, Jahmiya, so on and so forth. So there was a need. But if you're saying, how can we assume that every waqia, every karamat that we hear about Ghawth Pak, Shanshahi Vilayat, Imam al-Awliya is correct, then I'm saying that what you accept, if it conforms with your mind, it conforms, but sometimes it doesn't. Yes. Now, for example, the famous karamat that they would have a majlis gathering, Mullah Ali Qari would write this, 70,000 in their gathering, Baghdad Sharif, us doro zamane vich, yes. No social media, no, ajkal some post share kari, just on YouTube you have 150 watching. The 70,000 kutha. The Andaza Lao, one of their famous miracles, karamat is what? Remember, a miracle for a Nabi is referred to as a mu'jiza, and a miracle for a wali is referred to as a karama. Yes. So karamat, from amongst his karamat was what? That when they would sit in their gathering in Baghdad Sharif, the person at the back could hear just as clearly as the person at the front of the gathering. So 200 years ago, that would have made sense to the Muslims who were not doing podcasts then.
Of course, but
who were having these discussions then. Why? Because there weren't any microphones. There weren't sound systems. You did a janazah a couple of years ago of them 3 brothers who passed away from the road accident, I think it was, or speeding.
Four lads.
4 lads, yes. And there was 10,000, 15,000 you were saying that day that were present. Now how was it that 10,000, 15,000 people, chalo, wo to UK ki baat hai na, Amirul Mujahideen janazah last week, different mukhtalif riwayat and reports. Let's go with the highest end. 14 million that attended that janazah. But when the Janashin of Amirul Mujahideen,
I see, I'm going to still say, logically, looking at that, people say that, this is my argument is, Imam Adil, that we as speakers, we as imams,
maybe you should take the woolly hat off and a lot of logic will come in then.
No, but you see, it's quite easy to say, throw numbers. How?
May I hear?
I know what you're saying. No, I know you're saying the highest end of the spectrum.
Lowest at 1 million.
I'm not saying about you. You're a man of rationale and logic, and you're very logical.
You know yourself that I don't talk without giving dalil and proof and evidence.
So give us proof of 40 million then.
May I hear that's a news report. No, top end. Chalo, bottom and less than 1 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's be realistic.
Because he was saying, Badshai Masjid only has 600,000 capacity.
This is according to what Joe told us.
650,000.
I told you that. If the people are stood, then Badshai Masjid has a capacity of 650,000.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the pictures and compare it, andaze nal, then us saab nal, I'd say about 5 million banda banna hai.
Yeah, okay.
With my andaza. But andaza is debatable.
But you see, you're using the logic of the square meterage of the Badshahi Masjid and factoring that into the drone images that we see of it. I'm just saying that, we start creating...
You're saying that we sugarcoat things sometimes. We put a bit of extra.
We do. Do we not? And where does that go?
Baba, if there were insan there, the malaika ta ehsan na. जिन्नात सही जिन्नात भी ऐसा ना वो भी शामिल करेंगे
नो डाउट लेकिन उन्होंने गिनती उनको तू हो सकनी है
we can't see them
चलो
if you are bil ghaib they we accept imam bil ghaib
you're going to take it somewhere else in the terms of rationality.
I'm just saying that people there are objections that youngsters just 1 second there's objections that people will say here the argument will be here. Well, you're telling me a story that it don't make sense logically. You're telling me I know your answer. Look, I know the answer because I believe, but I'm playing the double role here. I have to, because the whole point of the discussion is that people are educated through questioning.
See, the question that you put forward, a lot of people will have.
Listen, you're on the street, bro. You tell me.
Especially from our understanding, I know a lot of people in our own, way of thinking. I'm talking Sunni, I'm talking in our, way of thinking. But they've got questions. They're our people. We've been fed this,
stories.
You mentioned Khwaja Sahab, 90 lakh, us zamane 90 lakh, mulk hai vich nahi, and they can't kind of.
But that's why I said directly or indirectly. When we say 9 million, we don't mean directly he did through his disciples, through his murideen, through his khulafa.
When the word 90 lakh is mentioned, the point
it baffles them.
Yeah, when the point you've just mentioned is never added on. And we live in a time now where you have to dumb it down for everyone.
I'll take that as a hidden compliment. Thank you very much.
14 million. Some people said 5 million. Some people said 1 million. They've not taken into consideration the fact that the numbers do not really matter. It was a manzar that nobody had ever seen in Pakistan before.
Biggest janazah in the
biggest
history
janazah
of Pakistan.
ever. Lekin, when it comes down to these finer details, this... the karamat that you mentioned of 70,000 people and without a speaker, people automatically, and it's a fitrat almost. It's become a fitrat because there has been times within our own kids now, especially the youth, are questioning, and that's because obviously there's other people with other views, counter arguments.
Look, this Ghauth Shahi, for example.
Yeah,
look at the views he's coming out with.
But he's on another level. Unna gal ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਗੌਰ ਕਹ ਨਾਨੇ ਗੌਰ ਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਐਡੀ ਬੜੀ ਕਰਾਮਾਤ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਮੁਜਜ਼ਨ ਕਿ ਅਸਾਂ ਅਜਰੇ ਅਸਵਦ ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਚਿਹਰਾ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਸਾਊਦੀ ਹੁਕੂਮਤ ਅਪਰੂ ਪੇਂਟ ਲਾਈ ਸ਼ੁਰੀ ਤੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਤਾਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਇਹ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਇਤਨੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਤਲਬ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅਜਰੇ ਅਸਵਦ ਪਰਨ ਇਤਨੀ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਪੇਂਟ ਨੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਵੀ ਆਈ ਜਾਣੇ ਸਨ. ਇਹ ਵੀ ਤਾਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਉੱਠਣਾ ਨਾ. But they
so it's illogical.
It's illogical.
It's illogical fallacies. These are just lies. People are building it on lies and no truths. See, how do you then differentiate?
But that's an extreme. That you can easily differentiate.
No, you can. I know you can. But I'm asking the question here, the thought here. People will then say, oh, it's all the same. Sari yejin. Aliyazu billah, ma'azallah, they'll bring the great awliya, God's friends into this as well.
This is why I've always said, and a lot of what we've done in the past in bayanat and taqareer and teaching, etc. Often we give this pagham and message to the people, especially like you say, dumb it down for people. The reality is what the asal or nakal ni pehchan rakho bas. understand who is upon asal, who is upon the
Who's real and
reality,
who's fake.
and who's upon what they call it, naqal yani fake. So
I get that, but
one
like,
can only do that when we have these type of discussions.
yeah,
Right at the beginning, I mean, believe it or not, these discussions, time flies. We've done an hour and 40 minutes already, an hour 30 minutes since you've been here, mashallah. And if you've been following the discussion from the beginning, and mashallah, we've got about 150, 200 brothers and sisters watching, if they're not debating in the comments and in the chat, because we're keeping
About COVID.
we're keeping an eye on you. If we're looking at our phone, then we're obviously keeping an eye on the comments, because you never know.
we are distanced, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
I got clear
It's
Oh, it's a good meter there.
Huh?
Good meter when you took your legs in.
Yeah,
And breathe in a little bit.
I've got the antibodies anyway, so you lot are from the same bubble, and I've got the antibodies, so we're sorted.
There you go.
I've
You
been-
know what was phenomenal?
Yeah.
Those who are in the comments causing a war.
The
that-
Dalil Mangso,
what's going on here?
अपने test result भी email
Yeah.
करी,
Yeah, please,
anti
man.
and uncle bodies है हमारे को.
They got nothing better to say. But you know what I'm saying is, Imam Adil, like, just I know what I'm asking here. What I'm asking yourself here though is this. How do you know? You're saying asal from naqal.
Yeah.
How can you say this is asal narration, not a naqal narration? What's the yardstick? What's the way you cipher? Like in hadith, we know if the Sahih hadith has 5 conditions.
With matters of history and with matters of tabaqat and tariq, there's always going to be that element
qasas.
of there's always going to be that element of is it going to be right? Is it not going to be right? You get that even in non-Islamic history.
Of course.
You know, it's not going to be 100% accurate. You know, when you study history in school and so on and so forth. So there's always that element and dimension to it. So it's not going to be 100% accurate. But then you've got a chain of narration, ठीक है, which we in usul al-hadith or ilm al-hadith we refer to as that narration which reaches the highest level of transmission is referred to as is referred to as tawatur. Yes, mass transmission, where you have a minimum of 10 narrators in every generation that narrate that particular karamat, in this case with Huzur Ghauth Pak or Waqi'a or whatever, the things in relation to their basic biography that everyone accepts. Born on the 1st of Ramadan in the year 470 in Al-Ghil, 478 after Hijri, in Al-Ghil or Al-Jil, depending on how you pronounce it, modern day Iran. Father is Abu Musa Salih Jangi Dos, lineage goes back to Imam Hassan Mushtaba. Mother is Khair Sayyidah Fatima, lineage goes back to Imam Ali Maqam, Nawasai Rasul Nabi Ka Nur Ain Imam Hussain radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. And then you've got 18 years old, they went to Baghdad. And then you've got obviously different the basic aspects of his biography everyone accepts. 49 children, subhanallah. Ghauth Pak had 49 children. Yes, and then they left this dunya in this month of Rabi'ul Akhir in the year 561 AH. Yes, 91 years old they were. These basic aspects of their biography everyone acknowledges and accepts, because it's been transmitted through mass transmission from the time of Ghauth Pak till today. Whether we find it in their books, in their works, or whether we find it amongst the Amatun Nas or Khawas. Yes, but in terms of the Karamat, I know what you're trying to say. There is always this element of shak or shubat, but we have a process of recording these things, and this is why Islam is quite unique compared to other religions. No other religion on the face of this earth has a level of stringency and recording and transmission and having asanid in these matters like the religion of Islam. This is the beauty of Islam.
It's found upon transmission.
Yeah.
What was it? Muhammad ibn Sirin, if I'm not mistaken, rahmatullah alayhi, who said that this deen is found upon asanid. It is found upon chains.
Therefore, be careful where you take your religion from. The last narration here in Ash-Shama'il.
And also mentioned in the Muqaddimah of Sahih Muslim.
Yes.
Imam al-Nawawi mentions in his Al-Minhaj, Sharh Sahih Muslim Ibn Hajjaj. So, like, as I'm mentioning, that it's very important that we look at the chain. Where is this coming from? And we are able to then put this into, what, that's a bit doubtful. It's narrated but doubtful. It's narrated but weak. That's a good narration. That's sound. There's no denying that. Do you understand? And do you see then where the other?
If again being I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong in bringing this in with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mu'jizat. You did a fantastic speech on the Mawlid occasion. Mashallah, went over by 45 minutes, but that's, standard. And if I go over by 5, तो Imam साहब वो time लाने. बहरहाल
तुसाने 5 थोड़े डाडे 5 होने ना.
वो खतरनाक होने ना आखिरी 5 मिनट होने ना.
आखिरी जरे होने ना.
मीटर फिर थोड़ा फिरिया होना ना.
असां दौड़ी के निकली जाने.
काफी दौड़ने. ठीक है, फिर वापस आ जाने. तो ये अपना he did a fantastic talk on the mu'jizat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's on the YouTube channel on our Al-Hikam Media.
Subscribe, guys. Subscribe. ASAP.
Subscribe, share, do what you need to do. The 2 essays. And you mentioned many mu'jizat on that occasion. The famous one that comes to mind, Bila tashbih wa tamthil Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, water gushing from their fingers. Again, that's beyond rationality.
See, I
so why is it that with the mu'jizat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we never have that discussion of rationality? Just saying it. Yes. But when it comes to Ghauth Pak or the Awliya, is it because they're of a level below the
common man
prophets?
perspective. Take it from.
I'll do it from the religious or the.
See, you guys are both learned between yourselves. Take it from me as in somebody who, if I heard this speech, what opinion I would take from it, and of the people I know, ird-gird. Acha, when it comes to Huzur Pak, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even when it comes to the lesser ashik, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but the ones who's not
love is not as overwhelming.
He's not, he doesn't,
overwhelmed.
Deen to thoda dur hai.
Thoda ja dur hai. Even he does not want to do that shak, and don't say I doubt that when it comes to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's just my opinion, and that's because that since day dot, since the moment we could comprehend what we are hearing, and then understand that this is what is being told to us. When it comes to Huzur Pak sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is jitna mohabbat and achhi gal hove, never doubt it. Jitna koi banda buri gal kare, you're supposed to get offended, like you mentioned, and you do something on that. See, it's about making the position of those personalities and the respect that they deserve, because it's not given that same level from that young age, which I know it should be, but that's the point we're at, and that's why today it's harder for somebody, for me to byan karna Huzur Ghauth Pak ne eh karamat ne, and then they might doubt that for that.
Hello.
COVID ne khilaf.
Are we back? Are we back? Oh, sounds back. Sorry about that. Technical issues. Guys, subscribe.
And let me just put the volume up on this and see that we're not actually back. Joe.
Are we back on? Can somebody confirm? Tawheed who's watching, mashallah. Muhammad from Bolton. Shehzad Aslam, mashallah, from Blackburn. And the list goes on. Quite a few brothers and sisters who are watching. Students, followers,
Sufyan said we're back on.
Yeah, we're back on. Yeah, no worries. Take it off. Don't worry about it. That's fine.
Okay.
We are back, people. So
Harun Shakil from Jordan, mashallah.
Yeah.
He says, Imam Sahib, if you can give him a thumbs up.
Who, me?
Harun Shakil, Imam Sahib to say,
And you?
I kind of feel
4 thumbs.
Does he want a North hand? Does he want a North hand to do
Everyone thumbs up, huh?
Get those thumbs up, you. Anyways, I was saying that, there's a methodology that is implemented in order to deduce whether one saying or narrating is correct or wrong. And eventually what happened is, over time, there were individuals who practiced tadlis, wada'. They used to fabricate narrations about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And those fabricated narrations, how did you know if it was real or not? The scholars of hadith did that. So they created this machine, this methodology which allowed you to then decide what was correct and what was not correct. Do you understand? So, Jara Ta'dil, critique and appraisal of narrators. Who's saying this? Is this guy a liar? If this guy is known to storytell and lie, then it's possible that he's lying about Rasulullah here. Do you understand? So there's a methodology that is implemented, and that's what I'm saying when it comes to stories of the past, historic events, etc. Tabari narrates them, Hafiz ibn Kathir narrates them. There's others out there who narrated and have books which mention these stories, etc. They mention, like Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah, if I'm not mistaken, that when it comes to fada'il, you can be relaxed. But when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ or ahadith, you don't be so relaxed in taking narrations. You have to be strict. So it's very important that we keep this methodology in mind.
Just to, sorry to bring up the whole door and age thing again, and sending it off on a bit of a wing, but it's all relative. I think in today's door, again,
this time,
English
for those who don't understand.
One of the issues that we do have is that the truth, sometimes people doubt that, as in the karamat and the mujizat of, the great personalities. People doubt those because of the stories we hear from the great of today. And
again, we go into comparison mode.
No, but what I'm saying is that even though we shouldn't, it happens if I'm in a mahfal and, somebody is overdoing, their great personality, who might be a general great personality, but it might be their Peer Sahab, and, they're telling these stories of, Asani gadi M 606 par ruki gi tha, asan pani baya tha, petrol chali pe, because they can relate to that, because they know the person sat there, there's a this man put water in a car, and because they relate to that, that's their first thing in terms of a karamat, and this is their first experience of it. So what happens then is when they doubt that, because it's doubtable for them more so, because it's like you, Imam Adil sat next to me right now, and you said to me, he flew in. Like literally, he was levitating on the way in. I've got a lot of love and respect, but I'm not going to believe that. But वैसे मैं misal देना पिया. But because that's doubtable for me.
Is that you saying that I'm fat?
Gravity.
I'm in no position.
I'm in no position. Weight is holding him down from levitating.
I'm fat, then just say I'm fat.
I would
it's
never.
The truth.
Huh?
No, I would never.
You would say that.
Don't mince the truth.
No, I genuinely do not think he's fat. I do not think you're fat.
I think I'm coming to this reality now. I'm beginning to accept it now, though.
But the point,
I weighed myself that day at Mum's house.
What, that you're fat?
No, I weighed myself 15.5 stones. मैं तो shocked हो गया.
Are you serious?
Shocked हो गया.
उस लिहाज नाल था, in the words of Sabir Sardar, मैं कुछ भी नहीं. उस लिहाज नाल I'm nothing, because I don't.
मैं तो shocked हो गया यार. There anyway.
How much do you weigh?
We need a podcast just on that.
अच्छा.
We have to set up a poll first before we tell anyone.
Mashallah, you
I'm weighing 12 stones 8-9. I've lost a stone. I was about 13-8. I'm about 12-8 now. I broke my jaw. Well, I didn't break my jaw. My jaw got broken by a close friend of mine. He punched me whilst we were playing football.
We won't name and shame.
Yeah, but he probably might be watching. He might not
just
be.
Mention the football part again. We need to make that.
Yeah, no. I didn't get in no fights or anything like that. Please don't get confused or make stories up. Please, this is another problem. People start making stories. You say one thing,
but this is the point that I'm making. This is what the point I'm making.
I tell you what, there's a sick one. Just about context. It's so important, man.
Massively.
I'm on the football group. That same group.
Yeah.
And one of the lads, he's put a tweet, screenshot it, and posted it on there, and. Let me read it out. Just 1 second. I'll be back.
We'll just wait. Yeah.
I'm back. and it was so right, man. It was so important. Let me.
Jawad Sahab, is the sound working? No issues, because it seems like
Mabruk, congratulations to John and Zulkifl for getting married earlier this evening. Alhamdulillah, we conducted their nikah and issued the certificate. May Allah accept their marriage and keep them united throughout their lives. Ameen. Thank you for the wonderful food.
To who and who?
John and Zulkifl, and there's 2 men standing there.
They got married?
Yeah. So what do you assume there? What do you think?
First assumption is, yeah, they got married to each other. But now, obviously,
Right.
because I know the
Now
discussion
now
we're
the
having.
context.
Yeah.
This is the problem. When you read something and you don't put context, there might be a story before it, context after it. We take things out of context. Oh, he's wrong. Oh, this is wrong. Oh, that's wrong. Please note, next week, Sister Zulkifl is not in the picture because we don't flaunt our women on social media. The Imam is on the right congratulating the groom on his nikah. See how that context, see. Now, when I read it first, even I thought, wow, the guy's got a beard. It can't be, man. And then the next tweet,
Did he say John and...
Sister Zulkifl.
Okay.
Sisters, now Zulkifl is a
male's
male's name, but chalo, they
Prophet's
put
name.
it put it to a female. But the man standing next
Yeah,
to
but
the...
that you can't blame people for that. That's an easy, confusion.
No, but what we're saying to people is, before you jump to assumptions,
It's like
ask
that,
context.
It's like that video that went viral of the Imam who did the nikah and then kissed the bride. Did you see that?
No, I've not seen that one.
Well, Imam Adil, tell us,
No, no.
please.
I think,
Maybe
it was in the-
badi.
I think it was going viral in the Maulvi WhatsApp groups.
Right,
Oh,
okay.
they viral हो सकना. It's
It won't come out to the public.
Oh, pata nahi, फिर बाद ही पता लग गया. A lot of fatwas going on him. बाद ही पता लग गया is the bride's
His
father.
daughter.
Yeah, the
Oh
bride-
yes, you know what? Now it rings a
Yes.
bell. It rings a bell.
So,
yeah.
You know, we were
if you
quick
don't
to...
contextualize it,
Big problem.
Ah.
Always siyak and sibak is important. Don't take anything. Do not just hear something and say, oh, I heard. You know, kafa bil mar'i kadhiban an yuhadditha bi kulli ma sami'a. Or kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam. It's enough to be deemed a liar. It's enough for a person to be deemed a liar that he narrates whatever he hears. I heard this here and I've told. Have you seen? Do you know context?
I don't know if you're going to pull me up on this one afterwards, but I think you're a prime example of this. Somebody who's suffered from this victimization on social media. If we're going to be genuine,
Yeah,
you know,
no,
somebody
okay.
who's suffered from it, and a lot of ulama go through it, and you know, people who base it on hearsay,
Yeah.
they don't have
Don't know the facts, don't know the truth,
they
don't know
don't know
what's
the
happened.
reality. They're very quick to then make the assumptions, share that with other people as well, and
News
again,
come out, or you know, this happened.
You know what it is? Sometimes, no matter how much of the context is put forward, drama sells.
No, drama sells.
Yeah,
but
you know,
entertainment.
Yeah.
But this is the spiritual state of people. I'm going to bring it back to the conversation.
Yeah,
now.
of course.
This is a spiritual weakness and illness.
illness.
We are ill. Our hearts are so ill.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about spirituality. Fix up your heart, bro.
Is there 99 excuses that the hadith says?
Yeah.
That even if you don't have the context, even if something...
Think good of the
Yeah.
best scenario.
even if
before
black
you
and
start
white is
assuming
wrong,
the worst.
but then you start, you have to give that benefit of the doubt, and we've lost that. Oh, आजकल वो दौर को नहीं दिया.
Then
In fact,
oh,
it's the
my
opposite.
brother, now
Hadith
it's-
Sharif, veil the sins of a believer in the dunya, and Allah will veil your
Yeah.
sins on the
We've
day of
forgotten
Qiyamah.
that. Nobody, and you know what?
And we'll do a podcast on this as well.
I
Come
mean,
the time.
I think
I'm
the
sure you're looking forward to that
the
one.
next life comes down to that as well, because realistically, there's having belief in God, which is the first question you asked me on this podcast. But then what you got to remember is, again, we're humans, we have these minds. Nobody does anything without wanting something or some sort of promise. Now, if you're going to
There's
be
an agenda behind it.
if you're going to be and you can be positives to that as well. If you're going to be a good Muslim, the promise
You'll
is
get
Jannah.
paradise, yeah.
You get paradise. Now, the thing is, there's belief
It's human
in
nature,
God.
that.
Yeah, there's people and there's experiences that I can tell you of where it would seem as if a person believes in God, so his actions are based on the fact that he believes in God, but he does not believe in the fact that anything is going to happen to him afterwards. And I think the belief in the afterlife, again, that's a whole separate podcast. That discussion comes massively down to the spiritual state that we're
Now,
in
somebody
today.
might say that, and I'm number one in this, very quick to point out fingers about X, Y, and Z.
Oh, yeah.
Flana P is like this, Flana Natkhwan's like this, or these are deviant, stay away from these lot, stay
Yeah,
away from
you pick out, yeah.
Yeah, but the reality is that's two different things. Yes, identifying the fault and the illness of a person, which leads to other people falling ill, the blind leading the blind, is something which is, you correct me if I'm wrong, mashallah, a very learned individual here. Allah Almighty is ada in the Quran as well. Yes, Allah Almighty Himself highlights, the traits and the behavioral patterns and attitudes of the hypocrites, and similarly that of the
To make
kuffar.
aware of deviancy.
That's something different. يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. Because I know some people say that, or that because if you're trying to justify one aspect of it
Yeah.
by saying, oh, we shouldn't expose and we shouldn't do this, then why do you do it for? Because I've had that before.
Well, yeah, I can imagine it's.
Yeah, I've had that
Yeah.
before. That you're very quick to point fingers at others. Why not look at your own house?
Yes.
You understand? Does it ring a few bells now as well?
Yeah.
Because I think
Chiming away up there.
chiming away in there. So this is something that we have to understand. That it's the job of the ulama. ta'muruna bil
Yeah, because
ma'ruf
you're in that position to
wa
do that.
tanhauna
Yeah.
'anil munkar.
Yeah.
Okay? Not everyone might agree with the approach, but the reality is that if we don't highlight their deviancy,
Yeah.
remember what did Imam Ghazali said, famous quote attributed, principles over personalities.
Yeah.
Principles over personalities.
Yeah, but what you highlight, Imam Adil, we've got to understand what you're highlighting. You know, I mean, I don't even want to go into my discussion or topic or whatever's happened with me in the past, for example. But what you highlight specifically, Imam Adil, in your defense and in the defense of those who highlight and do what you do,
Yeah.
is in relation to deviancy and misguidance within a person's creed. That if you
And his
listen to
belief.
such and such and belief, you know, this is detrimental to your faith and that.
And not just in terms of i'tiqad and belief, it's also in terms of deviant practices as well, which is you've alluded to a few times in this podcast.
No, but it's safeguarding,
There was an
isn't it?
example
And the
of
word
that.
safeguarding is used, and I'll be open here. You know, where it came to, in my regards, is the case of safeguarding against children. When, let's be honest and frank, you know, I'm sat here, I'm in my office, for example, there's a DBS CRB. One of the arguments, you know, he's got involved with underage children and that. You know, it's, whatever's done was done under the means or remit of safeguarding.
Yeah.
But where? You see, there's a clear difference in what you've done and what happened in my case. Where that's
Yours
not
was an accusation. What Imam Sahib counters is somebody's action. They've done it in the public. Matlab sare-aam, because a lot of the stuff that you counter is to do with and again, I'm going to talk like the layman because that's why I am. I mean, how we would word it is that it must be majlisan which jo kuch hona reha hai, whatever's been happening, which is in the public, somebody's action which is already out there. Again, you've got your andaz, other people have got their andaz. But when it comes to your thing, yours was a accusation which, at the end of the day, if something's got no backing, you're limited as to what you can say or do to it. Whereas Imam Sahib, when it comes to your kind of andaz from the field that you're looking at it from, is different because it's something that's out in the open and it's in regards to belief and it can ruin people in that sense.
Yeah.
So the way you act on it, you're allowed to have different ways of dealing with it.
Where a person is weak in his action is not as detrimental as a person who's weak in his faith.
Yeah.
It's something that's weakening the faith of a person. That's what Imam Adil works on.
Yeah.
That look, you know, stay away from this because this is going to weaken your akida, your creed, what you believe, your structure, your basis, your foundation.
Yeah.
Where it concerns me, if there's something that I've done in my life, private life,
Yeah.
is my concern.
Yeah.
I've done that in my private life.
Zati
I've made my
nuksaan hai,
mistake.
yeah.
So I'm hurting and harming myself. I'm not harming you or others here, am I? So it's understanding that.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to the discussion on spirituality and that, you know, these are illnesses. And when we look at spirituality isn't just the higher level in state of iman and higher states of faith that a person reaches. Rather, it's actually the opposite spectrum.
It's the
There
qawl
are people
of
who are
Sayyidina
ill.
Umar. It's the qawl of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that don't measure a person's spirituality or piety or their taqwa based upon their salah or their giving of charity. Look at their muamalat, look at their dealings, look at their sidq, look at their character.
It reminds me of a quote that I seen. You know, I love my quotes, but I don't know if it's got any Islamic background to it or not. But the quote was that Allah loves the tears of a wrongdoer more so than the tasbih of the arrogant. And you know, it kind of,
It could be a call of one of the awliya, which summarizes the hadith of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam.
Hazrat Ali is the kind
Wala
of
Ali
reference.
radiyallahu anhu is the
I
reference
don't
here.
know. I mean, I know we're transgressing in our discussions. We're 2 hours in, and to be honest, it's sometimes difficult to stick to the topic in the time frame. But we're having these productive discussions, and people probably are relating to them. I don't know about your lot's stance on this. And in hindsight, the discussion we just had about transmission and chains of narration, and so a lot of people are attributing such and such a call to Maulana Room, for example. Yes. Mathnavi Sharif, others attributing such and such a call to Sayyidina Ali. again, what is the level of accuracy in them? I take it with a pinch of salt.
Just to swing it in my common layman sense.
You are playing the layman's role today.
If what it says is not bad, is it such a bad thing?
No. If something is good, look, wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min. If there's good in it, then its automatic return is to who? The believers. Because goodness comes from the people of Iman.
Lost property of the believers.
So if it's a saying and there's good in it and there's no reference and name attached to it and there's no attribution, boom, we'll take that because there's good in that. Well, it comes back down to that point. How do you know what is being said is said by that person? Do you understand? We know.
But there should come a point where that matters as well. What my point being about if it's good,
then take it.
Like the quote we just said now. Say somebody wants to have a debate. Did that come from Hazrat Ali or not? Or did it not? Yeah. My point being that is there a point where it matters or where it doesn't matter?
Whether Hazrat Ali said it or not.
Yeah.
You're saying because it was good, take it.
Yeah.
Then that then falls under al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min. Wisdom, if it's a wise saying, it's the lost property of a believer. Whether Mullah Ali said this or not, whether Maulana Room wrote this or not, if there's good in that, that comes to us. Because we are the member of wisdom.
As believers, people of Iman. Using that particular quote then to justify our own stance. We find that quite common as well. So if we're going through a bit of a rough patch with our we've fallen out with our next door neighbor, or we've had a bit of a
tiff with our wife,
tiff with our
partners,
what we call it, fallen out with our brother, sister, whatever. Then we'll use that quote.
In our context,
really vexes me. We use that quote because it fits our situation, and we'll share it on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Or we'll share. I'm trying to do because it's happened to me a few times. Trying to do ishara to that person. When you're not really getting what he's trying to say, or you're not trying to understand it from that perspective.
That's on that individual then, innit?
Yeah.
He's using it the wrong way. There's no point me having a tiff with someone else and using the call of Mullah Ali to, make them look like a bad person. That's on me. What I'm saying is, for example, say I'm giving advice to another layman, yeah? Layman giving another layman advice, and I use something like, he's like, I don't want to go back to the masjid, and I'm really depressed, but I can't turn to Allah because I've done all this. Say I use that exact quote, the one about the tear of the wrongdoer is worth more than the tasbih of the arrogant.
Tear of the sinner.
Say I use that,
and
he wants to have a debate as to where it's come from. That is where I can then be in the position that because it is good, based on what you said, that it doesn't really matter where it came from. This is the attribute given to it, like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be breaking any rules there, would I?
No. Look, it's a saying. End of the day, it's a saying. Rome wasn't built in a day. Who said that?
No idea.
But it's a common saying in it.
Yeah.
It's well known. Meaning, look, sabr kar.
At 40.
Sabr kar. Things will happen.
A 40-year-old probably said that.
No, but somebody probably at 80 said that.
Yeah.
When looking back at life and said, I'm 40 years. You know what? Now really life's begun, because the first 20 years I was a child, and the next 20 years I was growing up and realizing, and I made all my mistakes. I'm 40 now. I should be not making mistakes now. I should be I'm in my peak. I'm in my prime now. I'm just topping my prime, going into Shaykh, for example. So what we're trying to say is that these sayings, a lot of what you read, a lot of what you hear, a lot of what is said, it should be reference and be within the methodology.
Yeah.
It's got to make sense rationally, akalan as well.
Yeah.
A lot of these things have to be factored when discussing and mentioning points, etc., etc.
And in turn, all of this then affects a person's spirituality, because that's our discussion today, right?
Yeah.
Our overall discussion, and then we've touched upon the more specific discussion of the Muslim reviver. So I don't know why our producer's shaking his head, because you were sat here till 11:30 for 2.5 hours talking about Diego Maradona and football, but our producers just come in now. I won't take names.
Producers just walked off.
Mashaka just walked off as well. Is he back now? So producer Saab obviously didn't have an issue on Thursday when they were sat around.
No, there's no wrong. We carry on.
Imam
Obviously,
you annoyed him now.
No, but I mean, just to sort of, he's rattled. I'll tell you what, we better stop now.
Producer Saab ro mashallah na koi pani us dare sardi mari ho aisi.
I said it on the first week, I'm going to bring my
yaar us dare crisps and chocolates and sara kuch si.
Are you serious?
Zidd hai yaar, koi aisa nal koi, because we're fat. Is that what you're saying?
It doesn't matter. You lot shouldn't be eating too much. It's past your eating time. You lot should be working on your physiques.
And you know, I'm one fat person that wants to be fat. I do not want to
enjoy
change.
the
So
fatness.
please provide all snacks you can, producer Saab. If
Have you ever been Baghdad, Sharif? Have you ever been to Baghdad?
I will not know.
Have you, Imam Adil?
No, I was planning to go this year, but COVID unfortunately has kicked in. So
You were planning to go everywhere this year, weren't you?
I was. We had
did you book
Palestine
with?
and Jordan lined up in August.
Yep.
We obviously had Umrah just before lockdown in
Yep.
March, and then Baghdad Sharif was on the list this year for obviously Rabiul Akhir Sharif. So quite a few brothers are taking groups. So khair. I know you've been twice, I think.
No, I've been once. I've actually been once to Baghdad.
Is it safe?
It was
our
nice. It
producer,
was
Saab.
good. It was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, in January that I went. Or 2016 or 2017, I don't know. I can't remember. And I went with Jabber. He was one of the guys I went with. The guy who broke my jaw, he was another one, playing football, by the way, that I went with as well. He went, very close friends of ours. We went together in a group of, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 of us.
Did he break your jaw after you went or before you went? I just need some more context.
Oh, he broke his jaw a couple of
I broke my jaw
months back.
3.5, 4 months ago.
Oh yeah, and you went
In
Baghdad,
between
that's it,
lockdown
yeah.
one
And I went
ending
Baghdad
and lockdown
2016,
two
sir.
Ah,
I
Jalo.
broke
Now
his jaw,
I've got
does
the
not
full-
last 4
Now
years.
I've got the full context. I won't make the comment I was gonna make.
Oh, right, okay.
We have
So-
to act upon what we talk about. as
No,
well, innit?
absolutely, absolutely. So, but I went Baghdad and it was nice. To be honest with you, it was the first time I went. Great experience. So many great men of Allah buried there.
Subhanallah.
You know, so many sites to visit, shrines to visit. You know, places to make dua. You know, and just a question on that, Imam Adil. A lot of darbars, shrines,
Yes.
mizars people go to. Why do they go there? Just in a nutshell, tell us why do we go there? What do they do there? Can we make dua there?
We go
What is
there
the
to pay our
tradition?
respects to those individuals who are resting there. Our belief is that they are from amongst those who are alive. وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ. So سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ here is not just in terms of the hakiki ma'na, those who gave their lives on the battlefield, but also those who sacrificed, like we were talking about earlier, jihad akbar and jihad asghar. So these men who sacrifice their lives in the way of Allah Almighty, it is our iman, our belief that they are close to Allah, and we make dua at their resting places, for it is a place where du'as are accepted. It's a place where dua is accepted, and there are certain maqamat and places around the world, no doubt, where the awliya and Ashabi Rasul and Anbiya are resting, and Ahlul Bayt Yathar, that becomes a place where the du'as, where a dua is accepted. So similarly, this goes hand in hand with when, no doubt, Sayyidina Zakaria al-Islam's example that we gave, of when they went to Sayyidah Maryam. So going
Mihrab.
to somebody of a greater rank, going to somebody of a lower rank, this is established from the Quran. Like this Sahaba went to Hazrat Khwaja Wase Qarni radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, whose name we didn't mention
Yeah, but the
earlier.
question here is,
So
Imam
they've
Adil.
left, but our iman is that they're alive.
Yeah.
Our iman is that they're alive. Yes, that they've tasted death for a moment. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. But our iman is that they're alive. Goes hand in hand with this verse. وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ. Surah number 2 verse 154. And then Surah number 3 verse 164. عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. That they are provided provisions by Allah Almighty Jalla wa'ala.
Yeah. Yeah, so we believe they're alive, therefore, you know, what does life in that world mean though? People might say, well, how can you say a man who's actually died is alive? You know, Western philosophy and other philosophies, how they team. No, but in a nutshell,
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to leave nobody, you know, after this podcast with questions, though we can answer them on another podcast, but
Yes.
in a nutshell, when we
They're
say
living
this,
in the grave isn't necessarily like our living here in the dunya. The provisions that they are reliant upon isn't what we rely upon necessarily, as in breakfast and lunch and dinner, so on and so forth. It is how Allah Almighty Jalla
it's a
wa'ala-
different world.
It's a different realm, a different world. Alamul barzakh. Again, it comes into the matters of alladhina yu'minuna bil ghaib. We know that no doubt the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that al anbiya'u ahya'un fi quburihim yusalluna. Ibn Musnad Abi Ya'la Sharif ki riwayat, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the prophets are alive in their graves, and not only are they alive, but they pray as well. Like this we saw on the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, Sahih Muslim Sharif ki riwayat, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam witnessed Sayyidina Musa Alayhi Salam, wa huwa qa'imun yusalli fi qabrihi, standing and praying in his grave. So if this is established for the Anbiya, then no doubt is established for the Shuhada. Yes, Siddiqeen, Anbiya, they fall into this category. And then we've got the verse from Surah An-Nisa which supports this. So the living, and then we know that the Prophet ﷺ said Allah Almighty has made it haram upon the earth to consume the flesh of the Anbiya. Yes, and the Awliya have their maqam wa martaba because of the Anbiya. Yes, they have their maqam wa martaba through the light of the Anbiya. They are a reflection of the Anbiya.
That's the living side of it. What about the assistance side of it, which is what a lot of people go for as well?
So our aqidah is what, that when we go there, we are not asking them directly, but rather we are asking through them. We are asking in reality from Allah. This is what a lot of people don't understand. It is our belief, our aqidah, that madad haqiqi, assistance in reality, and nasir haqiqi is Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. Madad in reality comes from Allah. Shifa in reality comes from istighfar, being accepted, and maghfirat comes from Allah Almighty. But Allah Almighty has placed certain wasa'il. Like He says in the Quran, Surah number 5, verse number 35, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasilata. So here, Shah Waliullah Muhaddis Delvi said what? That this means seek a means of approach to me. Allah Almighty says seek a means of approach. What this means is that you take a spiritual guide in the dunya, Shah Waliullah Muhaddis Delvi says, and then also you seek a means of approach through the men of Allah Almighty to Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. Yes, be that the Anbiya, Mursaleen, Awliya, so on and so forth. And someone said here that means of approach means through terms of salah and so on and so forth.
Actions.
But Ziauddin Madani, Qutb Madina, they give the understanding of this that ittaqullah actually refers to and covers the angle of actions. Wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasilati actually refers to wasilata refers to the man of Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala. So we go with this iman and aqidah that in reality it is Allah Almighty Jalla wa Ala who is providing
so it's important that we understand that, these are fundamental understandings pertaining to when visiting graves, etc., etc. And just an important point in relation to the life of people. A person dies. Death is the term given to the separation of the body from the soul. So when a person's body is in the grave, the body itself, and we'll do a podcast on the grave and stuff like that, but with regards to the soul is still alive. The soul has tasted death. Death meaning separation from body and soul.
Yeah.
It's tasted, and now the soul is still alive, but it's gone into another realm, another world. A world where the souls are staying up until the day of judgment. And in that world there's levels. In that world, how good you've lived in this world, it'll be according to how good you will have a time in the waiting room, which is deemed as the barzakh. So it's very important for us to understand that.
And any normal human can go into the barzakh as well. You don't
Everyone goes into the
Everybody,
barzakh.
Muslims, non-Muslims.
Non-Muslims, but there's levels. Like there's, the non-Muslims will be at the lowest. They'll be in the worst, and they'll be getting punished in that world.
So is that within the grave?
Punishment inside the grave, but the barzakh's not in the
punishment.
grave, it's the soul. The physical body itself is inside the grave at that time. But then it opens the discussion, what gets punished? Does the body feel the punishment? Does the soul get the punishment? Are the body and the soul connected even after death? And these are all questions we can elaborate on later. But in a nutshell, with regards to the spiritual sages and masters, they are alive inside the graves or inside the barzakh.
With that in mind, we also want to make it categorically clear that it is from amongst the ta'limat of the ulama rabbaniyin bil khusus. Sayyidi Ala Hazrat has written a full risala upon this, that prostrating and doing sujood at the mazar, the resting place of any of the awliya, is qat'an prohibited.
Is that just the action or the intention behind it? Because some people do something ta'zeem where they're just kissing with the
Sajda ta'zeem here is not in discussion. Ta'zeem is that sajda, remember, is on 7 parts of the body.
Achha.
ठीक है? Forehead, nose, 2 hands, 2 knees and 2 feet. So if all 7 parts of them are in sajda towards the grave, ठीक है? With the intention that you're doing sajda to the person in the grave, that is qat'an haram in Islam.
So what if all 7 are touching the ground, but you're not doing?
Yeah, but you're giving the impression that you are.
So you can't give the impression either.
No, if an onlooker is looking on, and he comes to the conclusion, she comes to the conclusion that you're doing sajda. So you might be doing on 6 parts, you might be doing on 5 parts of the body. But if it's perceived that you're doing a sajda, then you should avoid that.
So say you're by yourself and you want to do bosa, you want to, have that.
General doing bosa, touching the grave, placing it on your hand on the grave, and then kissing it, that's fine. Kissing your hand and then placing it out of love that you would do for a person who is living, perfectly acceptable and fine. But we're saying here sajda. So this is common amongst...
With intention.
With intention of it being that you're worshipping or showing some sort of obedience towards the person in the mazar, which is common amongst the juhala. You've been to a lot of mazarat in Pakistan, you've been Baghdad Sharif, we've been Palestine, so forth. So we see this amongst people, ignorant people. And again, this comes down to what we were discussing earlier, a lack of knowledge.
Yeah, but in our Sharia, doing sajda to ghairullah is haram. Why? Because sajda is only prescribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In
sajda as in the action and intention?
Intention is only for Allah Jalla wa ala. But where it comes to, for example, the previous ummams, doing sajda to other than Allah Almighty out of respect was accepted.
What was the word you used?
Other than Allah Almighty was accepted. Like Sayyidina Yusuf's brothers bowing down to Sayyidina Yusuf. This was a prostration of respect. Like the angels bowing down to Sayyidina Adam out of respect and honor to him. But in our Shariat, in our school or in our religion, bowing down to other than Allah Almighty is not permissible.
Albatta, the Prophet ﷺ said, if I was to instruct anyone to prostrate, it would be the wife to the husband.
Out of obedience, not worship. Not out of worship, but in obedience to the husbands, out of obedience. But sajda is solely for Allah Almighty. We should not do that to anyone.
We're having the discussion, and obviously it's quite late. We still got good viewership. I think 160, 170. Mashallah, brothers and sisters are watching. Again, please subscribe.
You're getting good at this now.
No, I think I'm.
You're in the same bubble, innit? It's not your fault.
You and your bubble.
The same bubble.
Yes,
big bubble, isn't it?
Brothers from the same mother, alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
वो अपना गाले that I feel that it is necessary to also touch upon this, that we have a lot of fraudsters and charlatans, and this is probably going to be another half an hour. A lot of fraudsters and charlatans in our communities today, where in the name of spirituality and tassawuff, they will look to pry upon vulnerable people, brothers and sisters who are suffering from mental illnesses, who've gone through a rough patch, who are probably, and that's something again common amongst our people. The brother or the sister in question is suffering from depression. That's
a massive cultural issue though, and
and we touched upon this a few years ago when we had the black magic and jinn seminar. I think it was 2016, was it? When I was in a bit of hot water then, and what do you call it? So we see this, and I made this clear on that occasion as well, and I make it clear again. Yes, brothers and sisters, messages. A brother came to Al-Hikam, father of a HIF student who studies here, I won't mention names, and he says that such a person asked me for £2,000 for a ta'weez. In Bradford.
Monetizing, using the name of the Quran and Sunnah.
Sister messaged me on Instagram similarly, and I said, if anybody's asking you for money, and we're making this clear, if anyone's asking you for money, that person is wrong. Yes, that person is clearly only in it for the money, marketing, exploiting the situation. Then similarly, we've heard worst case scenarios, sisters being sexually molested and raped,
abused.
Yes, and abused. If
I
can
use
use
them
them
words,
words,
the offering for whoever it is doing it.
Yes, and these are seedy men, disgusting, dirty men. Yes, using tassawwuf to fuel their own desires. If you find yourself in that situation, number one, chalo, you might be in a state of desperation. Don't visit a male peer without a mahram. Advice. Number two, if somebody is asking you for money, straight away alarm bells should be ringing off and should be going off, and you should be saying, that's it, I'm not going to proceed any further with this. Those who are genuine people, they will never ask for money. And then we have this argument, oh, they're not taking money. The reason I was in hot water. They're not
right.
taking.
I've only just clicked on.
Yes, they're not. It's late now. They're not taking money. But if somebody wishes to give money, the galta way baniya na.
No, but
No, if someone wants to, it's like you going for a speech, Imam Adil, like, you've done a speech and somebody's
you
offering
don't
you
demand, but
money.
if someone wants to
I've
give
given
you-
my time. What's he given?
His expertise in curing.
Oh, I'll give it a rest.
No, I'm giving an example.
No, but
I'm
look,
just saying.
on, for example, say I need
A
assistance.
genuine man of God.
Say I go to IMAH, for example.
If it's not, I'm talking about if he's not a genuine man of God.
Okay.
I'm talking to those people who say, "Oh, ji, asli peer sahab kuch nahi lene. Tajhe di aur tajhe tu sani neki hai."
So
Yeah,
basically
no,
saying give.
but it's
Indirectly.
It's harder to do. For example, say I go to IMAH. He's my magical.
Why
spooky-
you put my name, say Imam Adil?
Nah, because I don't want to see. I want to keep him for the legit one. You're the magical spooky master, yeah.
Don't, I'm not into any of that nonsense.
So I've gone to IMAH, for example, for I've got a few issues, and he sorts my problems out. Doesn't ask for a penny.
Again, contextualizing it, he's not married yet. Yes, so before people start,
Why did that have anything to do with anything?
because you're not.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't want people making stories up or he's got issues in his marriage.
All right, okay. No, this is all
Protecting you,
exemplary.
boss.
Yeah, I don't actually have issues.
You've got to say,
yeah,
break
yeah,
it
so-
down.
Yeah,
like
it's a
this.
verb
Dumb it
in
down.
it. Day and
this
age we
is
live in, they
an
take
example
words out.
I'm giving that Imam Sahib is this.
A person turns up.
Yeah, a person turns up. Hypothetically speaking, thank you for that, producer Sahib. Anyway, so I come to you, for example, he sorts my problem out.
Yeah.
He doesn't charge me a penny.
Yeah.
I then, out of appreciation, gift him. How do I know that he's only done that because he knew I was going to gift him something?
You can never know, can you? That's the reality.
Yeah, no, so what other
Yes.
conditions can we have to know who's real and who's not?
Well,
No, but
I
we
think
mentioned
we
how
mentioned so many.
why would you go to someone who is not learned, who is not practicing, who's not educated, who's not got a chain, who's not got none of that, who misses his salah? These people can't help you.
And
Help is from Allah
the
Almighty.
only thing that's going for him is a good marketing team.
Yeah, I suppose so.
You
yeah.
get me?
You know, that's what you call fake, a con artist. On the apparent is one face and behind closed doors is another face. No, it's finding genuine, real people. And when you bring Hazrat Ghauth Azam into this conversation, Sayyid Abdul Qadir Jilani, when he was asked what is the best litany that one can recite for troubles, said open the Quran.
Yes.
Yeah.
All your answers are in the Quran. All your cures and problems and situations that you need cures for, you'll find inside the Quran and the Sunnah. Go back to the Quran and Sunnah. What was the way of ruqya? You know, when you do ruqya, it should be the words of Allah Almighty, that when you wear a ta'weez, when you wear something around your neck, you're wearing it with this intention that Allah is going to give me the cure through the power of these words. These words are a protection for me. And we can go into the legalities and the permissibility of that. There's no denying. We don't even need to go into that. We're saying that people who are using these opportunities to exploit innocent people and make money from them and abuse them, this needs to be pointed out, and it comes under that safeguarding issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To save
massively,
people
yeah.
from con artists who have no intention but to satisfy themselves or to do anything in that regards and make the pockets
And
full.
then 9
comes
times
down
out
to
of 10 when these
education.
ta'wizat are opened and looked at, they have no verses of the Quran in.
There's devil pictures on there. There's all
Devil's
sorts happening
pictures
there.
and all sorts, and it has the adverse effect on that person. और ज़्यादा बीमारियां हो जानियां.
ताकि वो
तो सब-
customer मुड़ना रहे.
बस
Yeah.
कुछ ही क्यों ना. तो वो बकायदा इस तरीके, and then they have a pay package as well. यानी
Subscription.
ना एक
Monthly,
पहली किश्त पर इतना दो तो फिर अगली किश्त पर
Oh, yeah,
if you
yeah.
do this and this, and then we've got the other issue that as Imam Sahib alluded, if you're not reading your namaz, if you're not fasting, if you're not giving zakat, if you're not performing your umrah and hajj when you have the means to do so, you're not reciting the Quran, you're not reading tasbihah, then you're going to expose yourself to these things.
Yeah.
It goes without saying.
Yeah.
People say, oh, bapari kismat hai ye to, do something about it. Be positive. Seek knowledge. Become people of ilm. Become people of spirituality, as we're discussing today. Become people who have an attachment with the Quran. Today if our 3G or 4G is not working, and aajkal 5G vi chalna, the tufan ho jana ji, oh
Yeah.
ji, my Wi-Fi is not working, my connection's weak. What about our connection with the Quran?
Subhanallah.
Before going to a Peer Sahib, and I'm a huge advocate of Sahih Aqidah, Sache Pakke Peer, yes? Those who are crowns upon our heads. Jere ajkal 2 number churlu murlu jere finne na, Allah ina bachai aur our Sunnis,
You
unfortunately,
need a copyright that churlu murlu pa,
I got it from Peer Sayyid Nasiruddin Nasir.
Acha,
If anyone, mashallah, who did justice to this particular field and highlighting the issue within our Indian subcontinent culture. It was Peer Sahab Nasir Millat, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. But I want to conclude by saying, because mashallah, it's been 2.5 hours, even though we've got brothers and sisters still watching, we don't want to bore everyone. Alhamdulillah, I think we pretty much touched every topic that we wanted to discuss. Be careful, don't trust those people, there's question marks around them, stay away from them, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, if you really want to be, safeguard yourself from the spiritual illnesses and ailments out there and the influence of the shayateen and jinnat, become consistent in your 5 daily prayer, punctual in your salah, read the Quran and do tilawat of the Quran regularly, and attach yourself with good people, good company. A good company has obviously positive effects. So I think that's very important. So we've highlighted obviously some, I want you to take a few of the names as well, but I don't want to. I think Gohar Shahi we mentioned, somebody who you need to stay away from. A lot of youngsters, one or two people that you know as well.
Yeah. Big lads on that.
Yeah. So one or two people that you know who have fallen for his trap. And we'll openly condemn such individuals.
There's many fitnas out there that we should be.
And that's another thing, Imam Sahib, sorry.
Forgetting the
saving
basics,
ourselves.
A lot of people assume because they message me or they message you, or Imam Sahib speak about such and such, like this kid from Australia. What's his name? Haris? The one who's become a homosexual or something and became an atheist or left Islam. Maulana Mustansar did a...
No, that is Jaseen.
Whatever it is.
That is Jaseen is originally from Afghanistan. And, that individual who's an ex-Muslim now.
Yeah. He's confusing a lot of youngsters.
Living in the UK?
Yeah, he's in London. Down south.
I thought he was in Australia.
No. He's down south.
Is he like kind of out on the media and pulling people in?
Yeah. No, he's active on his Instagram, actively.
A lot of fitnas out there,
And to be honest, he hasn't really come across, there are people who have answered him, etc. But the way he goes, he wants these black and white answers. And many have asked me to actually speak to the guy and discuss and have a discussion with him with regards to slavery in Islam and the age of Sayyidah Aisha and divine guidance. And these are topics that he picks on and takes verses out of context and give me straight, and he's quite street in that sense.
So what I'm trying to say is a lot of people expect me or Chote Imam Sahib to name and shame everybody, but that's not our job. And we get a lot of messages, a lot of phone calls. I'm talking personally, I don't know about him, but I certainly get the message. Oh, Imam Sahib, can you speak up against such and such a person? Can you? When we did, nobody gave our saath. When we spoke up against such and such a person, first, our own people are pointing fingers. So what I'm trying to say is that you've got to be active yourselves. You've got to have that pehchan of who's right and wrong.
And you've got to protect yourself as
and
well.
And your children and your family members. You've got to take that responsibility. We're doing our part. We're trying our best. But we can't put out every fire.
Meaning go out and educate yourself. Go out and study and learn and read up on these things. Be open-minded. See what's happening. What you see wrong, speak out against the wrong. What you see right, take the good in that sense.
And get clarification.
And making sure that, and if you're confused, go to sound scholarship. Speak to them. Ask them. And in a simple nutshell, go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Go back to the basics and stick to that. And leave, the job of... pointing out deviancy, etc., to those who are experts within the field and those who are doing that job. And I think that the time and day and age we live in, we must focus on ourselves. Ku anfusakum wa ahlikum naran. Protect yourself and your families from the fire. Do what's right. Do what's best for you and your family. Adhere to the true teachings of Islam. And that's only going to come through ilm and knowledge and education and sitting with the scholars and the teachers and people who have their chains back to the Prophet ﷺ, who are sound and grounded within their knowledge as well. That's very important. And in a nutshell, and to conclude this discussion on Muslim revivers, Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, a man, these are all of what we've mentioned is in a nutshell and effectively what Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani stood for. This is what he preached, this is what he lived. And it's important for us, whether that's truthfulness, whether that's adhering to the Sunnah, whether that's staying close to the Quran, whether that's connecting with Allah Jalla wa'ala through the divine words, etc. This is very important for each and every one of us and something that we need to keep in mind in regards. And this topic on jinns and black magic and ta'weez and stuff. We'll actually do a podcast and in detail one on this. There's so much to talk about. I mean, we've done 2.5 hours today, and it has been a good stretch. Just final few words, Imam Adil, and then
Question just come through regarding kissing the hands of your sheikh. If a male is kissing the hands of a male sheikh, that's perfectly fine. Yes, it's proven from the practices of the Sahaba towards the Prophet ﷺ, Sahih Riwayat, and if I'm not mistaken, Imam Muslim towards Imam Bukhari, Imam Abu Hanifa, students towards Imam Abu Hanifa. So the practices of the Salaf. But if a ghair mahram sister is kissing the hand of a ghair mahram peer or sheikh or murshid, no matter what maqam or martaba or marhala that peer has reached, it is qat'an haram in Islam. Yes. Similarly, having free mix gatherings between brothers and sisters, and then justifying this. And ajkal, Tassawuff people have painted it as roaming around in the meadows and playing with daisies. थकिया हुआ लेकिन अजय मैं दी सकना को और समझें तसव्वुफ है और कुंबाया banjo के लपरिया कुंबाया playing कुंबाया. Man, this is tasawwuf. Tassawwuf is what? The true ta'limat and teachings of Sayyidina Shaykh Sayyid Abdul Qadir Jillani.
Imam al-Junayd, Sayyidina Ghazali.
They are the true representatives of Tassawwuf. That's what we need to go back to. Peer bane हुए तो लोग कहने ओ जी तको जी बड़े बकायदा इन बोल्टन में मीटर फिरिया हुआ ना इस तरीके नाल आसिफ फारूकी comes every year. बड़े मुतासर होंदे लोग.
Who's that?
देवबंदी who comes and qat'an deviant. Qat'an, what you call it, people should stay away from him. And is using great techniques to entice people. Up and down the country they go marketing, giving the leaflets, free transport. And Zakaria Masjid in Bolton.
What do they do like mouthfuls like Oslo?
Yeah, dhikr bhi
It's not
karne,
orange.
I don't
white
know,
ones.
but you know, my question would be then to counter that, how much are we doing? And this is going to open another discussion. Well, you know, we need to be out there. We need to show what the truth is then. And if we don't do that, you know, by
Maslaya Imam Sab, our situation.
You know, how are we going to attract the masses?
With podcasts.
You know, why are we alienating ourselves and restricting ourselves to alignment to one crowd when we should be aiming to get the masses in to follow the way that we follow? You know, the Ahlul Sunnah is bigger than any one personality.
If there was that unity amongst the personalities within Ahlul Sunnah who we place our trust in, then that would be possible. It's achievable. We have the wasa'il, we have the finances, we have the numbers. You know, again, Amirul Mujahideen's janaza, whatever figure you take, showed that, alhamdulillah. Numbers and wasa'il and finances and resources are with the Ahl Sunnah. The only thing we don't lack is tolerance towards one another. Unity and lack of respect towards one another. And this concept now, and this will open another can of worms. My sheikh is better than your sheikh. Mr. Layman. My sheikh is better than your sheikh. My peer is better than your sheikh.
I don't have a sheikh.
Apna rang laya hua, apna is tariqe naal, what do you call it, your own uniform. And that's it, we're promoting our own. Like I said, if everyone, don't misunderstand my words, if somebody meets the criteria of a sahihul aqeeda, sacha pakka peer, they're the crown upon our heads. Maybe ek peer na murida, alhamdulillah,
al-murshid al-kamil.
ठीक है, ऐसा भी नक्शबंदी मुजद्दिदियाँ, लेकिन ऐसा हर पीना एहतराम करने who ultimately upholds the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upholds the honor of the Ashab Rasul, Ali Rasul, Awliya Kamilin. एक या पीर साहब that पीर साहब criticizes Sayyidina Amin Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the murid नहीं असल ने पीर साहब, he can say what he wants. लानत तो ऐसी पीरी पर यार.
No, but you know, you're giving a lot of examples, but in a nutshell, just to tone you and calm you down, Imam Adil. Let me just in a nutshell to explain that, you know, the point that's being made in whatever andaz Imam Adil's making it, thinking he's in speech mode again when we're on a podcast. But you know, the point that's very important is that when it comes to your creed, you know, fundamentally you are found and known and identified upon the creed you follow. That is your fundamental.
That's your
whether you're Qadri, Chishti, Sorwardi, whether you're Shazili, all of this,
Naqshbandi,
all of these are in the scheme of what I'm saying irrelevant because they're all correct as long as the foundation, which is the creed, that's correct. So if the creed's not correct, if the belief does not conform to the Sunni true Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah constitution, then whatever name they give themselves, or whatever disguise, or whatever hijacking they do, it's in reality there is no truth in
ਇਹ
it.
ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਵੱਡੀ ਕਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ the ਪੀਰ can be ਸੱਚਾ but murid can be deviant.
Yeah, that's more common, I'd say.
ठीक है ਹੁਣ ਪੀਰ is Haji Imdadullah Muhajir Makki Rahmatullah alayh, yes, who was the one who told Peace Sayyid Meher Ali Shah Sahib, go back to the Indian subcontinent because the fitna is on the horizon. But his murids were who? Deviant murids. Ashraf Ali Thanvi, Khalil Ambedwi, Qasim Nanotwi, founders of the Deobandi school, yes.
Yeah.
Andaza lao. So, is tariqe naal pehchan rakhna, this is something that we have to do. But I think a lot has been said. Mashallah, 2 hours and 40 minutes, we've broken the record.
And I think we're going to conclude. Obviously, it's been a good discussion on spirituality, Muslim revivers, Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani,
Tassawuff
and Tassawuff of the past. And we should go back to study the Tassawuff of Imam al-Junaid. There are books. Risala Qushayriya is a good book, translated into English. Study this book, read this book. It's simple, and you will learn and you will see what Imam al-Qushayri, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the teachers of Sayyidina Ali al-Hujwari, aka Data Ganj Baksh rahmatullah
While
alayh.
you're telling people to educate themselves, a couple of people have messaged about any Dars in Nizami course or somewhere where they can learn. So if you, as an institute, if you've got anything.
And that's something very important that we need to look into, and these is something that we need to study. These are books that you should purchase, you should read, and align yourself and understand before you submit and you pledge your allegiance to anyone. Understand what you are doing. Don't just blindly follow and conform and think this is what's the way forward when it shouldn't be.
A lot of cults today, a lot of cults.
And Imam Adil starting again. I want to wrap it up now, to be honest with you. He said a lot today, and I think in a nutshell, it's very important to understand there's a lot more to discuss, and this is once again another episode of Let's Talk with IMAH. This is Deen and Dunya. Today was more Deen related than Dunya. But we've got loads of topics lined up, inshallah. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, Al Hikam Media. But more importantly, subscribe to the actual podcast channel, which is Let's Talk with IMAH. Eventually, all podcasts will be on that channel. So we need the subscribers to grow on there. Please subscribe and join on and benefit from the Let's Talk with IMAH podcasts, where I get guests on, people on, and we talk about different topics, subjects relating to the Deen and the Dunya. Allah bless you. Once again, thank you very much to the panel, to those who joined, Soulja Was and Imam Adil, for an insightful discussion on Muslim revival, Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jilani, and spirituality. May Allah Almighty bless us. Stay tuned for the next podcast. Keep up to date on our social medias, and send your topics through, whatever you enjoy, whatever you like. Send your feedback. Anything would be good. Any feedback will be listened to and read. Allah bless you, and see you on